When I was 11, I asked my mom why my sister had a bigger slice of cake than me. She smiled, patted my head, and said, "Because she's special, honey." That was the beginning of the script I didn't realize had been written for me since birth. I was the background character, the footnote, the placeholder son. And my sister? She was the shining star, the miracle, the center of the universe around which everything else revolved. Her name is Brielle, and she's exactly 3 years older than me, currently 33, with a sharp jawline, sharper tongue, and a whole fan club of extended family members who seem to think she descended from the heavens with a PhD and a Pinterest-perfect life plan. My name's Landon. I'm 30 now, and for most of my life, I played my role quietly, kept my head down, did what I was told, and tried not to ruffle feathers. But Thanksgiving this year, yeah, I'll get to that. Just know it didn't go how anyone expected, especially not Brielle, not my mom, who had what can only be described as a psychological eclipse in the middle of dinner. Not my dad, who sat there silently for 10 full seconds before whispering something that almost made me laugh out loud. But before we get to the wine throwing and the tears and the whispered accusations, let me tell you how we got there. Because this wasn't just one dinner gone wrong. This was years in the making. A slow, silent pressure building under the surface until it finally cracked wide open at the worst possible time. I grew up in a small town in Indiana. Not tiny, but the kind of place where everyone knows which church you go to, what car your dad drives, and whether your lawn was mowed on Saturday or Sunday. My parents, Mark and Denise, were both teachers. Dad taught high school history. Mom was an elementary music teacher. They were strict, but fair. At least, that's what everyone said. But that only really applied if your name was Brielle. Brielle was the kind of kid who could do no wrong. Straight A's, ballet recitals, honor societies, all that. Every refrigerator magnet-worthy accomplishment was hers. And when she walked into a room, my parents practically stood at attention. She didn't just bring home report cards. She brought home prophecies. Brielle is going places. Brielle's going to be a doctor one day. Brielle is going to change the world. Meanwhile, if I brought home a B+ in algebra, I got the "what happened here" face and a reminder that I needed to try harder. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't a bad kid. I kept to myself, got decent grades, had a few close friends, played guitar, worked part-time at a bike shop in high school. But I wasn't spectacular. Not in their eyes. And maybe that would have been fine if they'd just treated us equally. But they didn't. Not even close. I remember one Christmas when Brielle was 15 and I was 12. She opened her gift to find a brand new laptop, one of those sleek white MacBooks that had just come out. I opened mine and found a stack of used books about learning to focus. Dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "These will help you catch up to your sister." That was the year I stopped asking for anything. Fast forward to college. Brielle went to Northwestern. Full ride, pre-med, fancy internships, the whole package. I applied to a small state school with a solid computer science program and got in without much fanfare. When I told my parents I was majoring in computer engineering, my mom blinked and said, "Oh, but Brielle's working in oncology. Isn't that exciting?" That was the beginning of my silent years. I stopped trying to impress them. Stopped sharing updates. I didn't tell them when I got a research assistantship my junior year. I didn't tell them when I graduated with honors. I didn't even tell them when I moved to Seattle and landed my first 6-figure job. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer. Because deep down, I already knew what they thought of me. But here's the thing. Sometimes being ignored gives you space. Space to work. Space to build. Space to grow without interference. Over the years, I taught myself everything I could about machine learning, data architecture, and back-end systems. I joined a startup at 25 that got acquired 2 years later. Took my payout, invested half of it, and built my own company from the ground up. We specialized in AI optimization for logistics firms. By the time I turned 29, I had 11 employees for major clients and a net worth just shy of $7.2 million. I lived in a modest condo, drove a used Lexus. I kept it quiet. I still called home sometimes, visited for holidays, played my part. "How's work?" they'd ask. "It's going well," I'd say. And then they'd immediately pivot to Brielle's latest grant or her fiancé, Dr. Daniel Whitman, of course, who my mom kept referring to as our future son-in-law and an actual neurosurgeon. Isn't that incredible? I think I could have told them I was designing a spaceship and they'd still ask what color scrubs Brielle wore. Now, I need to say this. I didn't hate my sister. Not at first. She was just doing her thing, and I was doing mine. But over time, things shifted. She got colder, smugger, like she'd started to believe the press releases our parents wrote about her. At family gatherings, she'd say things like, "So, Landon, are you still doing computers?" And when I'd say yes, she'd chuckle and say, "Well, hey, we need tech guys too." That "tech guy" comment really stuck with me, especially because she said it last Thanksgiving while swirling a glass of red wine and telling everyone how Daniel had been invited to speak at a symposium in Geneva. My parents clapped like seals. I just nodded, then went out to the porch and stayed there for most of the night. So this year, I decided to do something different. I didn't plan a grand reveal. I didn't buy a sports car or show up in a tux. I just told myself I wasn't going to hide anymore. I'd answer questions honestly. I'd speak up. I wouldn't downplay what I'd built. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. Just because I was tired of pretending I was still that 12-year-old with the self-help books. Thanksgiving was at my parents' house again. Brielle and Daniel were already there when I arrived. She hugged me like she was greeting a distant relative and said, "Wow, you clean up nice." I was wearing a button-up and jeans. Nothing fancy. Daniel shook my hand and gave me that firm, overcompensating squeeze that some men do when they want to remind you who's taller. Dinner started off fine. Turkey, mashed potatoes, the usual. Mom had placed name cards this year, for the first time ever. Brielle at the head of the table, Daniel next to her. I was seated 2 spots down, between Uncle Rick and the sideboard. I didn't mind. I'd been seated closer to the garage once. The first crack came when my cousin Ashley, who's 19 and majoring in graphic design, asked me what I did for work. "I run a software company," I said. Calm, casual. My mom jumped in. "Oh, Landon does IT support, I think." I paused. Not quite. I founded a company that builds AI tools for optimizing freight and logistics. We've got contracts with some major shipping firms. There was a beat of silence. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Like, what kind of contracts?" I smiled. "Last quarter, we onboard a client with an annual logistics spend of around $400 million. We help them reduce waste and increase speed using predictive algorithms. It's been going well." My dad blinked. "You never mentioned that before." I guess no one asked. Brielle laughed. "That's cute, Landon. You always did have a vivid imagination." Ashley leaned forward. "Wait, are you serious? That sounds insane." I pulled out my phone, opened our website, and slid it over to her. "Here, that's us." She scrolled, eyes widening. "This is legit." That was the moment the temperature in the room changed. It was subtle, but I felt it. Like someone had turned the volume down on the Brielle show for the first time in decades. My mom looked confused. My dad looked stunned. Brielle looked annoyed. Not threatened yet, but definitely annoyed. Daniel just poured more wine. The questions started coming faster. Uncle Rick asked how many people I employed. Aunt Joan asked what city I lived in now. My parents didn't say much, but they kept glancing at each other like they were trying to do the math in their heads. And then Brielle asked the question that finally cracked the mask. "So, Landon, be honest. How much do you actually make? Like, salary-wise?" I paused. I could have laughed it off. Dodged it. Said something vague. But I didn't. Not this time. Last year, about $850,000 in salary and bonuses. But most of my wealth is in equity. Brielle blinked. "Equity?" I nodded. "Company shares. I own 83% of the business." The silence that followed was loud. You could hear the clink of a fork on porcelain from across the room. And then my mom, very softly, said, "You're joking." I shook my head. "Nope." And that was when things started to spiral. Brielle leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and muttered, "That's ridiculous." My mom's eyes started to glisten. My dad looked at me like I'd just told him I was moving to Mars. But no one said anything else for a few seconds. Then Daniel chuckled, slow and condescending. "Come on, man. If that were true, why are you living in a condo and driving a 10-year-old Lexus?" I looked him in the eye. "Because I don't need to prove anything." Brielle snorted. "Wow. So you've just been lying to everyone this whole time." That's when my mom stood up. Her voice cracked when she said, "You lied to us, Landon." And I just stared at her, stunned. Not at the words, but at how fast the script flipped. But before I could even respond, Brielle grabbed her wine glass and threw it. The room froze. The wine glass didn't shatter. That's the first thing I remember. How it should have shattered, The kind of movie moment where it hits the floor and bursts into pieces, red wine splashing everywhere like blood at a crime scene. But instead, it bounced. It landed sideways on the carpet by the china cabinet, rolling lazily to a stop while the wine soaked deep into the fibers. My mother gasped like someone had died. My father stood up abruptly, chair scraping across the hardwood floor, his jaw twitching like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out where to begin. And Brielle? She just sat there, arms crossed, breathing heavily through her nose like some self-righteous dragon who'd just torched a village and was waiting for applause. "I can't believe this," my mom finally said, voice trembling. Why? Why would you hide something like this from us, Landon? That part still gets me. Hide. Like I'd stashed away nuclear secrets or faked my death for insurance money. I didn't even know how to respond at first. My brain kept stuttering over the wine on the floor, the fact that I had just been accused, not of doing something wrong, but of being something wrong. I wasn't hiding anything, I said slowly, keeping my tone calm. I just stopped trying to impress people who didn't want to listen. Dad scoffed. That's not fair. I looked at him. Isn't it? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Brielle like she might help him form a sentence, and then sat back down heavily. He didn't say another word for 5 straight minutes. Meanwhile, my mom turned her attention back to me, visibly trying to compose herself. She smoothed down the front of her sweater like that would help settle her nerves. Landon, sweetheart, you have to understand how this looks. We're your parents. We should have known. You should have told us. You never asked, I repeated. We assumed you were doing okay. We didn't expect this. She gestured vaguely toward me like I was wearing a crown I didn't deserve. It's just a lot to take in. I could feel every eye at the table flicking back and forth between me and her like a tennis match. Cousin Ashley had gone quiet, her fork suspended midair. Uncle Rick was chewing mechanically, pretending to be invisible. Even Daniel looked like he didn't quite know which team he was supposed to be on. Brielle broke the silence again. You always had a chip on your shoulder, Landon. Honestly, this explains so much. Excuse me. She leaned forward, wine-stained lips curling into a smirk. You've always been resentful. I could feel it every time we were in the same room. You didn't like being the underachiever. And now what? This whole millionaire tech genius thing is supposed to make up for it. That did it. I looked at her dead in the eye and said, No, Brielle, this isn't about you. She laughed. Full-on laughed. Oh, please. Of course it is. You had to make a scene. Had to steal the spotlight. Thanksgiving, of all times. I didn't steal anything, I said. You just assumed I'd stay quiet forever. And then, as if on cue, my mother placed her hand over Brielle's and said softly, Brielle, honey, maybe we should all just take a breath. There it was again. That quiet gesture of comfort. That subtle alignment of sides. No one comforted me when the wine was thrown. No one asked if I was okay. They instinctively moved to protect her. Something in me cracked. I stood up slowly and picked up my plate. I think I'll eat in the living room. My mom blinked. Don't be dramatic. I'm not. I'm just done pretending this is normal. I walked out without waiting for a response. The silence that followed me was heavier than the food in my hand. In the living room, I sat down on the couch and started cutting into my turkey. My hands were steady, but my jaw was clenched so tight I could hear it clicking. A few minutes later, someone sat beside me. I expected Ashley or maybe one of the aunts. It was Daniel. Hey, he said casually. I didn't look up. Hey. He cleared his throat. So, you really built all that yourself? I finally turned toward him. Yeah. What? He gave a lopsided shrug. Just surprised, that's all. I always figured Brielle was the overachiever in the family. She is. At least, that's the official story. He chuckled, like we were two guys swapping stories over beers. Man, she's gonna lose it over this. She already did. He tilted his head toward the dining room. You know she's in there telling them you probably faked all of it, right? That this is some long game to make her look bad. I froze mid-bite. Of course she is. Daniel leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling like he'd seen this movie before. You know, I used to think the family adoration was cute. Like, wow, they really love their daughter. But after a while, I realized it's a cult. That caught me off guard. A cult. He nodded. You don't notice it until you're on the outside. Your mom talks about her like she's a myth. Your dad quotes her like a political speech. And Brielle? She believes it. Every word of it. I've never met someone so obsessed with her own reflection. I stared at him for a second, trying to decide if this was a trap. Then why are you marrying her? He smirked. I didn't say I was. That shut me up. He stood up a moment later, brushing imaginary lint off his slacks. Just thought you should know what's being said back there. Good luck. And with that, he walked off, leaving me sitting there with a plate of turkey and 100 thoughts bouncing around in my skull like marbles in a tin can. A few minutes later, Ashley slipped in. She perched on the armrest like a bird testing the air. Hey, she said gently. That was intense. Yeah. She hesitated. I just wanted to say, I think it's really cool what you've built. Like, I had no idea. They never talk about you, you know? That part stung more than I expected. I know. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. Anyway, just wanted you to hear that someone's proud of you. I nodded, grateful. Thanks. She left a minute later, and I returned to my thoughts. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to come and apologize. But no one did. Instead, I heard the muffled sound of voices from the dining room, low and urgent. Then footsteps. Then the unmistakable sound of my mom crying. It took everything in me not to roll my eyes. Because I knew that cry. That wasn't the cry of someone hurt. It was the cry of someone cornered. Of someone trying to summon sympathy before the narrative slipped out of her control. And sure enough, not 5 minutes later, my dad came in. He didn't sit down. Just stood there awkwardly, like a substitute teacher about to give a lecture he didn't write. Son, he began, I think it's time we had a serious conversation. Here we go. I placed my plate down on the coffee table and leaned back, arms crossed. All right. He scratched the back of his neck. This whole situation, it's caught us off guard. And I get it. You've been working hard. That's great. Really. But the way this all came out, it was aggressive. Disrespectful. Your mom's really shaken up. She's shaken up because I told the truth? No, he said quickly. She's shaken up because it felt like a betrayal. I actually laughed. A betrayal? You kept this part of your life hidden from us. And then just dropped it on Thanksgiving like a grenade. That's not fair, Landon. You know what's not fair? Spending 30 years being treated like a backup plan while Brielle got a standing ovation for breathing. His expression hardened. That's not true. Yes, it is, I said, voice rising. Every birthday, every graduation, every family dinner. She was the main event, and I was the intermission. He looked genuinely stunned, like he'd never even considered it before. Like the idea that their golden child narrative had collateral damage was brand new information. I'm not asking you to rewrite the past, I said, quieter now. I'm just asking you to stop acting like I owe you guilt for doing something right. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a tight nod. We'll talk more later. And just like that, he turned and walked away. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a retreat. By the time I went back to the dining room, dessert had been served. Pumpkin pie, whipped cream, coffee. No one looked at me, not even Brielle. She sat stiffly, red-eyed and silent, like she was mourning a tragedy no one else could see. I took my seat quietly and reached for a slice. As I lifted my fork, my mom finally broke the silence. Well, I hope you're happy. I paused mid-bite. Excuse me. You've humiliated your sister. You've embarrassed this family. And for what? To brag. I put the fork down. There it was. The final script rewrite. The last pivot. I was no longer the disappointment. I was the villain. And I knew, right then and there, that something fundamental had shifted. Something that couldn't be undone with polite smiles or obligatory phone calls. This wasn't just about a Thanksgiving dinner anymore. This was about the truth finally stepping into the light, and the people who couldn't bear to see it. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I didn't sleep that night. I left the dinner table after my mom's final jab, I hope you're happy, with a slice of cold pumpkin pie wrapped in a paper towel, and I drove back to my Airbnb in silence. No music. No calls. Just the quiet hum of tires against pavement and the slow burn of betrayal creeping into my chest. When I got to the Airbnb, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the slice of pie like it might answer the question I couldn't shake. How did telling the truth make me the villain? All my life, I had swallowed slights so small they seemed harmless on the surface. Comments, glances, omissions. But together, they built a wall I wasn't allowed to climb. And when I finally stood at the top, looking down from a place I'd built with my own hands, I was punished for not staying where they left me. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying my mother's face when I told her the truth. Not proud, not curious, not surprised. Hurt. like I had stabbed her in the back. By morning, I had 3 texts. One from Ashley. You okay? Yesterday was yeah. Let me know if you want to get out of the house today. One from Daniel. They're spinning. Just FYI. Might want to get ahead of it. And one from my mother. Call me. We need to talk about what happened. I ignored all 3 for an hour while I drank weak coffee and stared at a blank TV screen. Then, curiosity got the best of me, and I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Landon. Her voice was tight, rehearsed. I'm glad you called. You asked me to. A pause. Well, yes. I wanted to clear the air. I waited. I've been thinking, she continued, and I realized things got out of hand yesterday. Emotions were high. But your sister is still processing everything, and so are we. This was a lot to take in. I noticed. She ignored the tone. We've always wanted the best for you. But Brielle, she's had to work so hard to get where she is. Right, I said. And I haven't. You know that's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, Mom. That's always what you've meant. Another pause. I could hear her breathing through her nose like she used to when she was annoyed I hadn't emptied the dishwasher. I think it would be a good idea, she said finally, if you apologize to your sister. That actually made me laugh. You're kidding. She's devastated. You humiliated her in front of the entire family. You ambushed us, Landon. I sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds. You think I planned that? Well, she hesitated. It certainly felt like a performance. A performance would have involved fireworks and a saxophone solo. I answered a question. Honestly, you showed off, she snapped, finally dropping the gentle tone. You made her feel small on purpose. You embarrassed her. I could feel something inside me twisting. Not rage. Not yet. But a slow, tightening coil of clarity. Mom, I said, voice low, you do realize that she threw wine at me, right? That she insulted me. That you accused me of lying. But somehow, you're more upset that people stopped clapping for her for 5 minutes. She didn't respond. I'm not apologizing for being successful, I said. And I'm definitely not apologizing for your discomfort. She exhaled sharply. Then I don't know what else there is to say. Maybe nothing. And I hung up. That was the moment something snapped in me. Not out of anger, but resolve. For the first time, I saw the situation not as a wounded son desperate for approval, but as a man realizing he didn't owe anyone anything anymore. But the betrayal didn't end there. 2 days later, I got a text from Daniel. Just 3 words. Check your email. I did. And what I saw made my stomach drop. Attached was a forwarded thread from Brielle's email. It had been sent to several people in the family. Uncle Rick, Aunt Joan, even Grandma Karen. The subject line? Concerning Landon's claims. The email was several paragraphs long. I read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. In it, Brielle calmly and professionally questioned the legitimacy of my company. She said she'd done a little digging and couldn't verify any of my client contracts. She implied that I may be involved in shady tech dealings or overstating my success for personal validation. She even said I might be in a manic phase. At the end, she included a casual line. I say all of this with love. I just think we need to be cautious before we enable any delusions. Landon clearly needs support, not applause. Support, not applause. I sat there stunned. Not because she doubted me, but because she was trying to make everyone else doubt me too. And it worked. Within hours, I got 2 more emails. One from Aunt Joan, asking if I'd exaggerated my story. And one from my mom. Landon, your sister showed me the emails. I'm not sure what's going on, but I think you need help. We love you, but we're worried. Let us in. That one broke me. Let us in. Where had they been when I was a teenager building code in my bedroom because I had no one to talk to? Where were they when I got my first patent approved or when I landed my first client? Let us in. They had never even knocked. I called Daniel. He picked up on the first ring. I'm assuming you saw it. Yeah, I said, still trying to process. What is wrong with her? He sighed. You want the truth? Always. She's always been like this. But this is new. This is next level. She's trying to destroy my credibility. She's scared. The crown slipped, and she's grabbing at anything to keep it. I paused. Why did you send it to me? Because you deserve to know. And because I think I might be done with all this. There was something final in his voice. You're leaving her? I don't know yet. But I see it now. The manipulation. The control. The way your parents feed it. We were quiet for a while. Then he said, you should come back. Say nothing. Just show up. To what? Let them keep painting me as the delusional brother. No, he said. To show them you're not going anywhere. To remind them you don't need their approval. I didn't respond, but the idea planted itself like a seed. The next day, I went back to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I just knocked on the door around 3 p.m., wearing jeans and a black coat, holding a thick folder in my hand. My mom answered, surprised. Landon, are you all right? I'd like to talk, I said, stepping inside. She hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Dad was in the living room. Brielle was on the couch with a cup of tea and a smug expression that faltered the moment she saw the folder in my hand. Good, she said, setting her cup down. I'm glad you came. We really need to discuss. No, I interrupted. I need to say something. They all froze. I sat down across from them and placed the folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and began laying out documents. Company registration, bank statements, a redacted client contract, the most recent valuation letter from our accountant, shareholder breakdowns, tax filings, photos from the last investor meeting. Then, I opened my laptop and played a short, 2-minute clip from a conference I'd spoken at a few months ago in San Diego. I was on stage, fielding questions about neural network scalability. When it ended, I looked at them. I didn't want to do this, I said. I didn't want to prove anything. But since someone decided to smear me behind my back, I figured it was time to bring receipts. My dad's face was unreadable. My mom looked like someone had unplugged her brain. And Brielle's expression twisted into something bitter and unfamiliar. I never meant to smear you, she said, voice trembling. You accused me of being mentally unstable, I said. You sent emails to the entire family saying I fabricated everything. I was just worried, she snapped. You ambushed us. You lied. I never lied, I said louder now. I just stopped telling you things because you didn't care. And now that I've built something real, something bigger than anything you imagined for me, you're trying to tear it down because it doesn't fit the story you wrote. You're twisting this, she said, standing now. You think you're so perfect? You think just because you made some money. It's not about money, I interrupted. It's about respect, about finally being seen. And you, all of you, can't handle the fact that I did it without you. My mom stepped forward, as if to calm things, but I raised a hand. No, I'm not here for a group hug. I'm here to set the record straight. I packed up the folder, slid the laptop back into my bag, and stood. For the last time, I said, looking Brielle dead in the eye, I'm not your shadow. And I never was. Then I walked out. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I wasn't running away from the family I grew up with. I was walking toward the man I had become. I thought walking out of that house would feel like closure, that I'd finally get to slam the door shut on decades of second place and sit with the satisfaction of having stood my ground. But the truth is, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like I'd just lit a match in a room full of my childhood memories and watched them all go up in smoke. The silence that followed my exit was deafening. No one chased after me. No one called out my name. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of the door quietly closing behind me as I stepped into the crisp Indiana air and walked to my car. When I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. Through the neighborhoods I used to bike through as a kid. Past the library where I'd first taught myself to code on their ancient, humming computers. Down the street where Brielle once won a community science fair for building a vinegar and baking soda volcano that our mom talked about for 6 straight months. Past the diner where we used to go for pancakes after Sunday church, where Brielle would get an extra scoop of whipped cream and I'd be told, you can have more once you finish what's on your plate. Every landmark felt tainted, like I was walking through a museum curated by someone who had written me out of the script entirely. I finally stopped at a park. Empty, except for a squirrel tearing into a discarded sandwich wrapper near a bench. I sat down, letting the wind bite through my coat, and tried to think. But there was nothing left to think about, only feel. And I felt tired, not just physically, but deep in the bone exhausted. I had fought so hard to become someone worth noticing, and in the moment where it finally mattered, when I pulled back the curtain and showed them what I'd built, they didn't see me. They saw a threat to their story. And stories, especially family ones, don't change easily. It would have been easier if they had just stayed quiet. But they didn't. Because the next morning, it got worse. A new email. From my mom. The subject line, Landon, We need to discuss boundaries. I opened it with shaking hands. I don't know why I thought, even for a second, it might be an olive branch. It wasn't. She wrote that she and my father had talked it over and decided that my presence at Christmas might be too disruptive this year. That my outburst had created tension in the family. That Brielle was still recovering emotionally. That maybe some space would be healthier for everyone. Space. Like I was radioactive. Like I hadn't just spent the last decade sacrificing sleep and sanity to build something meaningful while they were too busy clapping for someone else's success to even ask how I was doing. I closed the email without responding. Then I shut my laptop. Then I sat there in the Airbnb kitchen with my hands pressed to my face, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not big sobs. Not cinematic tears streaming down my face. Just quiet, tight-chested grief. The kind that leaks out in slow drops and tastes like mourning. Because that's what it was. I wasn't mourning a person. I was mourning the idea of a family. One I'd spent years pretending I was a part of. One that had never really been mine. And it hit me, in that moment, that I had spent my whole life trying to earn their respect. And maybe I never would. I stayed in Indiana longer than planned. I had originally booked the Airbnb for 4 days. I extended it to 10. I didn't go out. Didn't see friends. Didn't even answer most texts. Ashley checked in a few times, and I sent her polite responses. Daniel texted once more, just a thumbs up emoji and the words, "Saw the fallout. Good for you." But I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just done. Emotionally fried. And more than that, I was ashamed. Not of who I was, but of how long I'd let them decide who that was supposed to be. I ordered in food. I binged mindless shows I'd already seen. I read a book on leadership I couldn't absorb. I told myself I was relaxing, but I wasn't. I was grieving. Quietly. Alone. And when I finally gathered the strength to check my phone again, I saw what I had missed. A post from Brielle on Facebook. A smiling selfie. Captioned, "Grateful for family this Thanksgiving. And for the strength to rise above toxic people, even when they share your DNA." I stared at it for a long time. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "You're so strong, Brie. Ignore the haters. You shine no matter what. They're just jealous of your success. Family isn't always blood. Stay close to the ones who support you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because that post told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just rewriting the narrative. She was weaponizing it. I was now the toxic brother. The ungrateful one. The liar. The dramatic embarrassment who tried to overshadow her at Thanksgiving. And everyone was buying it. Or at least, everyone who mattered in that insular little family bubble. It was almost funny. All this time, I'd worked in silence. Built a life. Made something real. And in one weekend, my own family decided that reality was less believable than Brielle's version of events. And worse, they preferred hers. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. It's that they wanted not to. Because if I was telling the truth, then what did that say about them? It was easier to cast me as the unstable one. The outburst. The black sheep. Because then they didn't have to face the years of neglect. The favoritism. The quiet cruelty they swore was just normal parenting. I could have fought back. I had proof. I had money. I had a bigger platform than they knew. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd been too hurt to see before. You don't win by proving them wrong. You win by walking away. And so that's what I started doing. Quietly. One step at a time. I canceled the auto-renewal on the family cloud photo account I'd been paying for. I unfollowed Brielle on every platform. I turned off email notifications from my mother. I blocked my father's number, not out of rage, but because I knew he wouldn't call anyway, and I didn't want to keep looking at the silence. Then I opened a spreadsheet, and I started making a plan. Not a revenge plan. Not yet. But a life plan. One that didn't orbit them. One where the center of my universe wasn't the hope of getting invited to Christmas, or the pathetic thrill of a half-hearted, "We're proud of you." No, I was done waiting for their applause. And as I stared at the blinking cursor in the spreadsheet, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. They had no idea what I was really capable of. They thought the success I'd shared was the climax. But it wasn't. It was just the prologue. I left Indiana in the middle of a snowstorm. Not metaphorically, an actual, heavy, blizzard-style whiteout that swept across the state 2 days before my Airbnb reservation ended. It was like the universe wanted to put a final period on my time there, to make it as cold and brutal on the outside as it had been on the inside. I packed my bags, loaded my laptop and files into the back seat, and started the long drive to Chicago, where my flight home waited. The roads were slick, the radio was low, and I drove mostly in silence. But in that silence, something strange happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't trying to rehearse a speech in my head or imagine a gotcha moment that would turn the family tide. I felt light, like I'd finally stopped dragging a wagon full of bricks behind me. Bricks labeled "Prove yourself, make them proud, maybe this time they'll listen." It was over, not because I had lost, but because I had finally stopped playing. And that's when the rise truly began, not with some dramatic viral post or revenge scheme, but with the peace that came from letting go. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of space, my space, and I was going to build something new in it. Back in Seattle, my condo felt like stepping into an alternate life, like I had passed through a mirror and returned to a world that hadn't changed while I had completely transformed. The plants in my windowsill were still alive, barely. My neighbor's cat still patrolled the hallway like he paid rent. My startup Slack channel still pinged with deadlines and bugs and inside jokes. But I wasn't the same Landon who left for Indiana. Not anymore. First thing I did was schedule an all-hands meeting with my team. I logged in, turned on my camera, and saw all the familiar faces pop up. Julia from marketing, Aaron from sales, Raj from product, and 3 of the original devs who had helped me build the backbone of the company from scratch. And when they all settled in, waiting for me to talk, I didn't give them the usual weekly update. I gave them a story. I told them about Thanksgiving. I told them, without naming names, about being treated like an afterthought my whole life. About building in silence. About the moment I finally spoke the truth and what happened next. And then I said, I want this company to be a place where no one ever has to shrink themselves to survive. Where no one ever feels like their story has to be watered down so someone else can feel bigger. No one said anything at first. Then Julia smiled and said, well, damn. That's the best Monday kickoff I've ever heard. Raj clapped. Aaron typed in the chat, Landon, main character energy. That meeting changed the tone of everything. Over the next few months, we didn't just grow, we exploded. We closed 2 new clients in Q1, both of them referred through connections who had seen our work online. One of our use case demo videos went semi-viral on LinkedIn, and we started getting attention from venture funds. I did 2 podcast interviews and 1 TED-style conference talk, and for the first time, I didn't downplay our success. I didn't act like we were just a small shop, because we weren't. We were making waves in one of the most competitive tech spaces in the country, and I was the one at the helm. With growth came money, more than I'd ever really known what to do with. I upgraded my condo, not to a mansion, but to a sleek modern townhouse with a rooftop garden and space for a recording studio. I started working with a personal trainer 3 times a week. I hired a financial advisor, not because I was worried about losing money, but because I wanted to learn how to move it, how to make it work for causes I cared about. And I began investing. Quietly, strategically, not just in tech, in people. I reached out to small business owners with good ideas, but no resources. Artists who needed grants. Coders in underrepresented communities who just needed someone to believe in them. I created a micro-investment fund and called it First Shadow, a name that meant nothing to anyone else, but everything to me. Because I'd lived in the shadow. And now, I was giving others the light. A few weeks after launch, I got an email from Ashley. Subject line, have you seen this? Attached was a screenshot of a Facebook thread. A family cousin had posted about exciting career opportunities in the tech field, and someone in the comments had said, you should talk to Landon. I heard he's doing something huge out in Seattle. Underneath that, a comment from my mother. Let's not exaggerate. He's always been a bit theatrical. That one stung. Not because it was shocking, but because it was expected. That's who she'd always be. Who they'd all always be. And I wasn't going to change it. But I didn't have to anymore. Because for every one of them, there were 10 others now. People who saw me, respected me, believed in me. I was building something bigger than a company. Bigger than revenge. I was building legacy. The next milestone came 6 months after Thanksgiving. A major logistics firm, one of the top 5 in the country, signed a 7-figure deal with us. I flew out personally to finalize it. At the signing table, their CEO looked at me and said, I have to admit, when your name came across my desk, I thought you were older. I get that a lot, I said. What you've built is impressive, she added. And fast. Where'd you learn to do all this? I smiled. In a quiet house, I said, with a lot of time to think. She didn't ask more, just nodded. Sometimes the people who get you don't need the full story. A week later, I got a call from Daniel. We hadn't spoken in months. I answered, unsure of what I'd hear. Hey, he said. We never really finished our last conversation. I said nothing, letting the silence carry the weight. She knows, he continued. She knows I'm done. You left, packed up, and moved out 3 weeks ago. She's still telling people I'm just taking space to find myself. But I filed the paperwork already. I didn't know what to say. He let out a breath. She's unraveling, Landon. Not just about the relationship. About you. What do you mean? She keeps bringing you up. Asking why you get attention now. Why everyone's talking about you. It's eating her alive. That's not what I wanted, I said quietly. I know, he replied. But it's what happened. I didn't ask how the rest of the family took the breakup. I didn't care. I only asked one thing. Do you regret it? He paused. No, he said. Not anymore. It was around that time I started getting media attention. Nothing huge, just mid-tier tech blogs and a few industry newsletters. But one story really caught fire. It was titled, "The Quiet Millionaire Who Built a Logistics Empire Without a Whiff of Silicon Valley." It told the story of a soft-spoken founder who built a multi-million-dollar AI company without venture capital, without legacy family support, and without the noise of self-promotion. It talked about first shadow, about how I was investing in others, about how I believed in building something real, not just something loud. The story went viral in a way I wasn't expecting. New followers, new connections, invitations to panels, podcasts, summits. People loved the idea of a quiet disruptor. And while I appreciated the attention, I didn't need it. Because I knew the truth. I hadn't done any of this for the spotlight. I did it to stop shrinking. And now, there was no going back. Of all the ways the story could have ended, I never thought it would be a wedding invitation that pulled me back in. It arrived in the mail one morning, tucked between a property tax notice and a flyer for luxury tile installation. I didn't recognize the envelope at first. Gold trim, heavy cardstock, my name written in a perfectly rehearsed script that tried too hard to look handwritten. Inside was a save-the-date card for Brielle and Daniel's wedding, June 14th, 4 p.m., Heritage Ridge Country Club. I sat there in my kitchen, coffee still steaming beside me, and just stared at it. She was actually doing it. After everything. After the Thanksgiving wine throwing, the smear emails, the quiet character assassination, the breakup Daniel himself had told me about. She was pretending like none of it happened. And then I looked closer at the card. It wasn't just a standard wedding invite. It was a showcase. There was a full-blown insert listing the venue, dress code, registry links, charity donation options, and even a QR code that opened a digital memory book with their engagement story, which, for the record, was a lie. I remembered the real story. She'd told it over Thanksgiving dinner last year, and it didn't involve any of the poetic lines she'd now written into her fairy tale. But what caught my eye most of all? A list of featured speakers. There were 3 names. One was her college mentor. One was a close friend from med school. And the third? Mark Thorne, father of the bride, Toastmaster. No mention of me. Not as a guest speaker. Not even as a groomsman. Just my name on the invite, tucked in with 120 other guests. And knowing Brielle, that meant I was a seat filler. A prop. Another pair of clapping hands in the audience while she played the starring role in her curated Cinderella moment. But here's what Brielle didn't know. I had already started my revenge. Not the screaming kind. Not the petty, obvious kind. But the kind that moves quietly in the background, like a chess player sacrificing pawns for positioning. And by the time that wedding came around, checkmate would already be in motion. It started with a question. Not how to get revenge, but why? What did I want? A dramatic confrontation? A public takedown? No. What I wanted was simpler than that. I wanted truth. I wanted her to feel, in front of every person who ever praised her, the same sting I felt sitting at Thanksgiving year after year, hearing my own accomplishments treated like background noise. I wanted her perfect image to crack, not through force, but through reality. And reality, as it turned out, was on my side. Because Daniel had told me something months ago that I hadn't forgotten. She's unraveling. So I started looking. Not stalking. Just observing. Every public post. Every tagged photo. Every professional profile. Every small inconsistency between what she said and what was actually there. And it didn't take long before I found it. A discrepancy in her medical board certification. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't digging through private files. This was all public information. But her LinkedIn claimed she was board certified in neurology. Yet the official state licensing board said she was still pending completion of her final specialization hours. In other words, she'd jumped the gun. And in the medical world, that's a big deal. Especially when your wedding is being framed as a networking gala with half the guest list made up of hospital executives and donors. It wasn't fraud. Not legally. But it was definitely a lie. A calculated one. And it gave me exactly the thread I needed to start pulling. I reached out to a friend of mine named Claire, an investigative podcast host I had met during one of my TED-style events in Portland. Claire had built a reputation on peeling back polished veneers and exposing the truth underneath. Her last expose had gone viral after uncovering a nonprofit's misuse of grant funding. I told her about Brielle, about the disparity in credentials, about the way she carefully sculpted her image for maximum applause. Claire was intrigued, but cautious. "She's not running for office," she said. "Why should people care?" "Because this isn't about one lie," I told her. "It's about how many people believe it." I sent her the engagement story, the fabricated speeches, the screenshots from Thanksgiving, the Facebook post calling me toxic after I exposed the truth. I didn't beg. I didn't exaggerate. I just let the facts speak. And Claire agreed to feature Brielle in a short-form series on professional pretenders, people who build elaborate public facades while quietly bending the truth behind the scenes. Nothing illegal, just curated deception. It would run the week before the wedding. I didn't give them the wedding date. They found it on their own. Meanwhile, I played the part. I RSVP'd yes. I bought a tailored suit. Subtle, sharp, charcoal gray. I didn't ask to bring a plus one, but I knew I wouldn't be coming alone. Because at the last minute, I invited a guest. Ashley. She had stayed quiet through all of this, supportive, but cautious. I didn't blame her. It's hard to choose sides when one side is the family you still have to see at Christmas. But when I told her what I was planning, not the specifics, just the broad strokes, she said one word. "I'm in." She booked a flight that night. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Brielle wouldn't have allowed anything less. The venue looked like a scene out of a bridal magazine. Strings of fairy lights, glass chandeliers, floral arches. Guests arrived in tailored suits and floor-length dresses, champagne flutes already half empty before the ceremony even began. I kept a low profile, mingled politely, shook hands, complimented centerpieces. But there was a weight to my silence now. People didn't dismiss me. They leaned in, asked what I'd been up to, made quiet jokes about the family genius finally coming out of hiding. The podcast episode had dropped that morning, and by 3 p.m., it had already hit 70,000 downloads. Not a takedown, just uncomfortable truth. Titled, "The Sisterhood Effect, When Applause Becomes Armor." I didn't need to quote it. Everyone already was. Snippets floated through the crowd in hushed murmurs. "Did you know she's not actually board certified yet?" The podcast said her engagement story was made up. "I heard her brother runs some massive company. Why isn't he in the wedding party? There's something weird going on with that family." And Brielle? She smiled through all of it. But I saw the strain, the micro-tightening around her eyes, the way her posture stiffened with every toast, the way her laugh got half a second too loud whenever someone mentioned the word podcast. She knew, but she couldn't react, not without proving the story right. And that was the beauty of it. The revenge wasn't in destroying her. It was in making her live inside the truth she tried to bury. Every speech, every photo, every compliment, all of it now filtered through a lens she couldn't control. During dinner, I kept mostly to myself, until Brielle finally approached. She waited until Daniel stepped away from the table, then slid into the seat across from me with a glass of wine in hand. "Same vintage she threw at me last Thanksgiving." "I know what you did," she said under her breath, smile frozen in place. I didn't flinch. "Do you?" She leaned in closer. "You couldn't just let me have this." "I did let you have it," I said quietly. "You just couldn't hold on to it." Her smile cracked. "Just a little. You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "I know it does." She blinked, stunned at the calmness of it. Then, like a true actress, she straightened up and sipped her wine. "I should have cut you off years ago. You never had that power," I said. "And now? Everyone knows it." She didn't reply. She just stood up and walked away, heels clicking like gunshots across the polished floor. Ashley nudged me from beside her. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded. Because for the first time in my life, I was. Not because I had gotten revenge, but because I had finally stopped waiting for the applause. I wasn't the side character anymore. I was the author. And the story? It was just getting good. The wedding ended like most do. Laughter echoing under fairy lights, cake smeared on plates, a tired DJ playing 2000s throwbacks for a slowly thinning crowd. But beneath the gloss and sparkle, I could feel the tension buzzing like faulty wiring behind the drywall. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew something had shifted. The next morning, my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Dad, and a single text from Brielle. "You win. I hope it was worth it." I didn't respond, because it wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about telling the truth in a place where the truth had never been welcome. And finally, it was out. Irreversible. Standing in the daylight like it belonged there all along. The podcast episode had passed 300,000 plays by the end of the week. Claire messaged me. "You underestimated how many people needed to hear this story." I hadn't done any interviews. No post-wedding statements. No social media cryptic posts or subtweets. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. What happened next came slowly, then all at once. Brielle's hospital board requested a formal review of her credentials, standard protocol, but humiliating for someone who had branded herself as a rising star in her department. She wasn't fired, but the press made it clear she'd need to clarify her miscommunication. Her wedding photos were stunning, but none of the captions said what people were really thinking. And Daniel? He didn't move back in. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ashley sent me a screenshot of his new LinkedIn job update. Relocated to Portland. Available for consulting. No mention of Brielle. My parents sent a long email around that time. A clumsy, overwritten olive branch. No apology, not really. Just vague lines like, "We were shocked by how things unfolded. We still love you deeply, even if we don't always see eye to eye. Family should stick together, even when it's hard." I read it 3 times, then archived it. Because love without respect is just a softer form of control. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. Life, meanwhile, kept moving. My company hit another funding milestone. We opened an office in Austin. I started mentoring a group of young founders, kids who reminded me of myself at 19, full of ideas and nowhere to put them. I gave them space, tools, the one thing I never had growing up, validation. Sometimes they asked about my story. I'd tell them just enough to let them know where I came from, but never so much that it defined me. Because that was the final part of the revenge. Not the takedown, not the podcast, not the ruined fairy tale wedding, but this. Peace. The kind that doesn't need a spotlight. The kind that doesn't explain itself. The kind that quietly builds a better life, while the people who dismissed you scramble to rewrite their roles in your success. And one morning, almost a year after that unforgettable Thanksgiving, I got a package at my office. No return address. Inside was a hardcover family photo album, one of the old ones from our living room shelves. A note was taped to the inside cover. Just 6 words, written in my mother's handwriting. "We should have seen you sooner." I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't frame it or throw it away. I just placed it on the bottom shelf of my bookcase, where it would stay, silent, heavy, untouched, like a chapter 1 had already finished. Because my story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and I was finally writing it in my own voice. I turned 18 on a Tuesday. No party, no cake, no candles, just a weird, quiet dinner where my parents kept exchanging glances like they were waiting for something to explode. I remember the mashed potatoes were lumpy and cold, and the chicken was dry. I sat there, pushing food around my plate, wondering if maybe they had some kind of surprise planned. They didn't. After dinner, my mom cleared her throat and said, "Lucas, can you come sit in the living room? We need to talk." My dad was already seated in his usual recliner, legs crossed, arms folded. That look on his face, the one where he tries to look serious but ends up looking like he's trying too hard, was already setting off alarm bells in my head. I sat down across from them, thinking for a split second that maybe they were going to tell me they were proud. Maybe even something cheesy like, "You're a man now." I'd been working part-time at a local hardware store since I was 16, keeping my grades decent, and even got into a state university with a partial scholarship. I didn't expect fireworks, but I also didn't expect what came next. "We just want to be honest with you," my mom began. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. We never really saved up anything for your college. I blinked, trying to process. Before I could even react, my dad jumped in, like he couldn't hold it in anymore. It's not that we didn't want to, he said, leaning forward. It's just, well, we honestly didn't think you'd actually go, or amount to much. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so jarring I thought maybe they were joking. But they weren't. My mom just gave me this tired, almost pitying smile. You were always kind of unfocused. You know, not like your brother. And there it was. My younger brother, Caleb. Golden boy, honor roll, private soccer lessons since age 6. I love him. I really do, but he's always been their favorite. When he turned 16, they threw him a surprise party with a shiny new car parked out front. He got a college fund. I got a pair of socks and a keychain that said, "Go get him." At the time, I shrugged it off. I figured they were waiting to help me when I actually got in somewhere. I figured they were just being careful. Turns out, they'd written me off years ago. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, nodding slowly, pretending it didn't sting like hell. Okay, I said. Thanks for telling me. I went back to my room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. That night, I started applying for every scholarship and part-time job I could find. I picked up weekend shifts at a local diner, started doing odd jobs on campus bulletin boards, even tried tutoring younger kids for cash. I was determined to go to college, even if I had to crawl there. That was 6 months ago. I'm in my second semester now. I work 2 jobs, barely sleep, and sometimes I skip meals just to make rent. And yet, every few weeks, I get a text from my mom saying something like, "You've been really distant lately. Is everything okay?" Or worse, she'll send one of those guilt-trippy messages like, "We're still your family, Lucas. You can't ignore us forever." As if I owe them closeness after what they did. As if I'm the one pulling away for no reason. What really drives the knife deeper is how they keep bragging about Caleb's potential like it's a group project they're all invested in. He's not even sure if he wants to go to college. They gave him everything, and he's still trying to find himself. Meanwhile, I'm pulling 12-hour shifts and passing exams with barely enough energy to keep my eyes open. Last week, I visited home for the first time in months, mostly because Caleb begged me to come. He doesn't know the full story, just that things have been weird between me and our parents. When I walked into the living room, I saw my mom showing someone a photo of Caleb holding up his acceptance letter, grinning like he just won the lottery. She looked so proud. I stood there in the doorway, invisible. She turned and gave me a quick hug, then said, "You look tired, Lucas. Maybe if you let us help, you wouldn't have to run yourself into the ground." Help? Now they want to help? I said nothing, just smiled and nodded. But something changed in me that night. I realized they would never see me as anything but the backup plan, the afterthought, the kid who somehow failed to fail. And maybe that's exactly what bothers them the most, that I didn't crumble when they let me down, that I didn't become the disappointment they were so sure I'd be. What they don't know is, I've been keeping track of everything. The money they funneled into Caleb's dreams. The way they spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. The backhanded compliments, the subtle digs, the complete lack of support. I've been biding my time. And if they think I'm distant now, they haven't seen anything yet. That visit home didn't last more than a few hours, but the aftertaste lingered like sour milk in the back of my throat for days. I couldn't stop thinking about how my mom looked at me when she said I looked tired. Not concerned, not sympathetic, just vaguely judgmental, like I'd brought it on myself. And maybe in their eyes, I had. Maybe struggling to put myself through school, working night shifts at the diner, and early morning stocking shelves, was proof that I wasn't smart enough to figure things out the way Caleb had everything lined up. But I was trying. God, I was trying so hard. That week back on campus, I pulled 3 doubles in a row, slept on the floor of my tiny apartment between shifts, still managed to turn in a 10-page essay on time. And then on Friday, I got a call from my dad. He never calls. I let it go to voicemail. I had just finished a graveyard shift and was walking home in the early dawn, my feet aching and my shirt clinging to me with the scent of burnt eggs and coffee. I listened to the voicemail while walking under gray skies, half zoning out. "Hey, Lucas. Listen, we were wondering if you'd be free next weekend. It's Caleb's big showcase for his photography class. You know, the one where his work is getting featured in the school lobby? We'd love to see you there. Whole family's going. Your mom's even ordering catering. Just let us know." All right. I stopped walking. Catering. for a high school photography exhibit. And suddenly, I was 16 again, standing in the rain outside my school's debate final, waiting for anyone, to show up and cheer me on. They never did. Said they had errands. Said it wasn't that big of a deal. And yet here they were now, pulling out the red carpet for Caleb's artsy photo collage. I didn't call back. I didn't even text. And when the weekend came, I picked up an extra shift at the diner. During my break, I scrolled through my mom's Facebook and saw her latest post. A dozen photos of Caleb standing next to his photos, framed and lit up. Him smiling with mom and dad, posing with his friends, laughing. The caption said, "So proud of our baby boy and his incredible talent. The future is bright, and we'll always be your biggest fans." I kept scrolling until I hit another post from earlier that week. A photo of me, taken without my permission, working at the diner. Someone had tagged me in the background, blurry and hunched over a counter. My mom had commented on it. "Our other son, working hard. He's always been such a trooper." No context, no pride, just pity. It was around this time that the requests started rolling in. Not for me, from them. "Hey, Lucas," my mom texted one afternoon. "Caleb's thinking about applying to the same university as you. Would you be willing to help him with his application? Just some editing and feedback." The same university. The one I clawed my way into. The one I was only able to attend because I practically sold pieces of my soul to every scholarship committee willing to listen. The idea of him just walking in because he liked the vibe felt like someone had dumped boiling water down my back. I waited a full day before replying. Then I wrote, "Sorry, I'm swamped with work and exams. Maybe he can ask one of his teachers." No response. A week later, my dad called again. This time I picked up, mostly out of curiosity. I was standing outside the grocery store, holding a bag of discounted instant noodles. "Hey, Lucas," he said casually. "Quick question, do you still have your old laptop?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" "Well, Caleb's just broke, and we thought, since you probably don't need it anymore, maybe he could use it? He's starting to apply for colleges now, and it would really help." I blinked. "You mean the laptop I still use for school? The one I'm literally writing papers on right now?" There was a pause. "Oh, I just assumed you'd upgraded by now." I laughed, dry and bitter. "No, Dad, I haven't. Because I can't afford to." He didn't apologize, just kind of chuckled awkwardly and said, "Well, maybe when you do, let us know, all right?" That was when it started to click. They weren't just favoring Caleb. They genuinely saw me as an accessory. A spare tire. Something to be used when convenient and stored away when not. It wasn't about love or fairness. It was about expectation. Caleb deserved things. I was supposed to earn scraps and be grateful for them. A few days later, I got sick. Not like a little flu, really sick. Fever, sore throat, full body ache, the kind of thing that makes you think your organs are melting. I had to call out of work, which meant missing rent by about $40. I texted my mom, not to ask for help, but just out of desperation to feel human. I said, "I've been sick. Haven't slept. Can't work." She replied 3 hours later, "Oh no. Hope you feel better soon. Drink tea. Maybe Caleb can drop off some soup if he has time." He didn't. And when I finally dragged myself out of bed 2 days later to check my mailbox, there was a card inside. One of those cheap dollar store greeting cards with a puppy on the front. Inside was a $10 bill and a sticky note that read, "You've always been a fighter. We believe in you. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at it for a long time. $10. Meanwhile, I knew Caleb was about to get a new camera. Dad had mentioned it on Facebook. A $1,000 DSLR because he had an eye for things. That was the breaking point. Not a shout, not a blow up. Just a quiet, seething realization I would never be enough for them. Not even close. And the more I tried to earn their love, the more it made me look pathetic in their eyes. I stopped responding to texts. I declined calls. And then came the moment that turned frustration into fury. 2 weeks later, I was on my way to work when I bumped into Caleb on campus. He looked surprised, but happy. "Hey man, I didn't know you had class in this building." I told him I was actually on my way to work. He frowned. "Still doing that diner thing? Still paying my own way?" I said. He laughed like it was a joke. And then he said something I'll never forget. "You know, Mom and Dad were actually going to help with your tuition at one point. But they thought it might make you complacent. Like, you'd stop trying." I froze. "What?" "Yeah," he continued, oblivious. "They said you needed to struggle a little to stay motivated. Like, if they handed you money, you'd just waste it. I stared at him. My own brother. Parroting back the logic that justified my suffering. He shrugged. Anyway, I gotta run. I've got a meeting with the student gallery director. They're thinking about giving me my own wall this spring. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring after him as he walked away. The world didn't blur, didn't shake. It just hollowed out. That was the moment I decided I was done playing along. Done pretending like the distance was unintentional. Done giving them any part of me that they hadn't already discarded. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't go to work that day. I walked past the diner, past the student center, past everything, until I found a quiet spot behind the library and just sat down on the cold concrete. I don't even know how long I was there, an hour, maybe two, staring at the cracks in the sidewalk, watching ants crawl around like they had somewhere to be. I thought about Caleb's words over and over again. They thought if they helped me, I'd stop trying. That I'd grow lazy, that I didn't deserve help. I had been breaking my back for 2 years straight, working myself into the ground while they watched from a distance and congratulated themselves on how my suffering was somehow noble. Necessary. Character building. I felt rage, yeah, but beneath it was something heavier. Something I hadn't admitted to myself until that moment. Shame. Not because I'd failed, but because I'd spent so long chasing scraps from people who never saw me as worth feeding in the first place. And now, the worst part? I felt hollow. I had nothing left to prove, and no one left to prove it to. That night, I went home to my apartment and stared at the bills on the kitchen counter. Rent, overdue by 5 days. Electricity, due in 2. My phone was at 3% battery, and I couldn't find my charger. I hadn't eaten anything except a gas station granola bar since yesterday morning. And I was so tired. Tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Tired in my bones. I laid down on the floor because my bed was covered in clean laundry I hadn't folded. I pulled a hoodie over my face to block out the light from the hallway. And I just stopped. For 2 whole days. I didn't go to work. I missed class. I let my phone die. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I just lay there, feeling like a ghost inside my own skin. And when I finally got up, when my stomach hurt so bad from hunger that I couldn't ignore it anymore, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My face was pale. My eyes sunken. There were bags under my eyes so dark they looked like bruises. And still, I reached for my backpack, grabbed my laptop, and walked to the campus library. I had one thing left. My mind. It was the only thing they hadn't taken from me. I started slow. 1 email. 1 scholarship. 1 line on a resume. I applied for a campus tutoring job. Then another part-time job at the computer lab. I went to the financial aid office and asked questions I should have asked a year ago, found out about emergency grants I didn't know existed. I sold a few old books online, even posted my notes from last semester's chemistry class on a study help site, and started making $10 here and there when people downloaded them. I ate ramen for a week straight and drank water from the library fountains. I went to bed with my coat on because I couldn't afford to turn on the heat. But I kept going. I started waking up early, not because I had energy, but because I needed time to work before classes. I'd take shifts at the computer lab from 6 a.m. to 9, then sprint to class. In the afternoons, I tutored high school students over Zoom, using the library's study pods for privacy. I even started helping a freshman with math in exchange for meals. He had a generous meal plan and didn't mind sharing if I helped him pass calc. And slowly, so slowly, I started to breathe again. There was this moment about a month later that I still think about. It was 7:45 a.m. and I was sitting at the computer lab desk, eating a banana I'd gotten from the tutoring center's free snack table. The sun was pouring through the windows, lighting up the dust in the air. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like a failure. I didn't feel like someone chasing approval or trying to win affection. I felt capable. I'd done this. Not because of them. In spite of them. And then the universe threw me a bone. I got accepted into a research fellowship program, one that paid a monthly stipend and offered me lab experience. I applied on a whim weeks earlier, thinking I'd never get it. But I did. And the email came with the subject line, "Congratulations, Lucas." I sat there and read it 5 times before I let myself believe it. 3 days later, I was able to pay rent on time for the first time in months. I bought a space heater. I restocked my fridge with actual food. I even replaced my frayed backpack with one I found on sale. And then, in one impulsive act of self-care, I bought a cheap journal and started writing again, something I hadn't done since I was 15. It wasn't all sunshine after that, not by a long shot. I still had moments where I'd get bitter. I'd still see family photos online and feel that sting, like a wound I kept scratching. Caleb posted a video of his college decision reveal, and there they were again, Mom and Dad, clapping and crying and hugging him as he opened his acceptance letter. They bought him balloons, took him to dinner, made a whole slideshow about his accomplishments. The caption said, "One down, one to go," as if I was just background noise. But something inside me had changed. They didn't break me. They tried. Whether they meant to or not, they loaded me down with doubt, tied bricks to my legs, and tossed me in the deep end. But I swam. I clawed my way back to the surface, breathless and shaking, but alive. And one night, sitting at my desk with a cup of actual tea in hand and the heat humming quietly in the corner, I realized something strange. I no longer cared if they ever said, "We're proud of you." Because I was proud of me. I didn't need their words. I didn't need their guilt-tripped apologies or their backhanded praise or their thinly veiled pity. I had built something out of ashes. I had found my footing in a storm they left me to face alone. And now? Now I was watching, waiting, not for them to change, but for the moment they'd need something from me. Because I knew it would come. And when it did, I'd be ready. By the time spring rolled around, I had a routine that worked. I wasn't thriving yet, but I wasn't drowning either, and that alone felt like a kind of victory. The research fellowship gave me just enough stability to stop constantly fearing the next rent deadline. I had groceries in the fridge, a desk that didn't wobble anymore, and my own copy of the campus gym pass, which I'd won in a scholarship raffle. I still worked long hours, but I wasn't exhausted. I was driven, focused, and something else had started to grow alongside that drive. Clarity. It started with a single question, the kind that buzzed in the back of your mind when things go quiet. What would they do if the roles were reversed? I thought about that more than I'd admit. What would they do if I were the golden child and Caleb were scraping by? Would they have let him struggle like they let me? Would they have made him fight for every crumb of affection, every dollar of support? Or would they have thrown him a lifeline at the first sign of trouble? The answer wasn't hard to guess. They never expected me to win. They never even expected me to compete. And now that I was doing better than ever, there was this weird tension in the air whenever we talked. Because, yes, we still talked occasionally. Out of obligation more than anything. My mom would send little check-in texts. My dad would forward boring news articles he thought were relevant to my major. Caleb would send selfies from campus. But none of them ever asked real questions. None of them knew what I was doing. They assumed I was still floundering, still juggling plates with shaky hands. So I let them think that. At first, it was just easier that way. But slowly, it became strategic. I stopped posting on social media. I let my profile go dormant. When I got new achievements, another grant, a published research paper, a faculty recommendation, I didn't breathe a word. Not even to Caleb. Especially not to Caleb. Because around this time, Caleb started applying to my university. The same department. The same program. And that was when I knew the opportunity would come sooner than I thought. One afternoon, I was in the tutoring center when I overheard two faculty assistants talking about spring admissions. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just recognized the name they mentioned. Caleb Monroe? I froze. I leaned slightly closer, pretending to organize folders on the nearby shelf. His portfolio's strong, but the writing sample? Yikes. Yeah, the other laughed. The photography's decent, but the essay was all over the place. A little entitled, if I'm being honest. They moved on to another applicant, but my ears were burning. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into the student portal where peer review opportunities were sometimes listed and searched for Caleb's name. I didn't find his application, but I did find a research assistant listing he had applied for. The same one I'd been offered weeks earlier and turned down due to schedule conflicts. And here's where it gets wild. He used my name as a reference. No heads up, no text, no email. Just casually dropped me in there as someone who could vouch for his academic work. Work I had never seen. Work I knew was shaky at best because we talked about it last Thanksgiving. He complained about hating lab reports and not getting any of the material. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I reached out to Professor Owens, the one running the RA program. I asked him, casually, if I could take the position after all. My tutoring schedule had lightened, I told him, and he was thrilled to offer it back to me. That was step one. Step two was, well, a little more satisfying. About a week later, Caleb texted me out of the blue. Hey man, just applied for the Owens RA position. Used you as a reference. Hope that's cool, smiley face. I waited 2 hours, then replied, just saw it. Hope you're ready for it. It's a lot of work. He replied instantly. Haha yeah, but profs love me. Shouldn't be hard. I didn't reply after that. Because while he was flexing, I was scheduling a meeting with Professor Owens, where I would quietly and professionally mention that while I supported my brother's ambitions, I couldn't in good conscience recommend him for a research-heavy position when he had admitted to struggling with the material. I didn't trash him. I just told the truth. Owens nodded thoughtfully. That tracks. His writing sample wasn't great. Then, as if rewarding my honesty, he added, glad you're on board again. This year's cohort could really use someone like you. Someone like me. That hit harder than it should have. Later that week, Caleb called me, frustrated. Did you talk to Professor Owens? He emailed me this super vague rejection and said I didn't seem like the right fit. I kept my voice steady. Yeah, he asked me about your work ethic and background. I told him what I knew. Silence. Seriously? You used me as a reference without asking. What did you think was going to happen? He didn't yell. Caleb wasn't a yeller. But I could feel the tension crackling through the phone like static. You could have helped me. No, I said calmly. I could have lied for you. That's different. He hung up. I expected backlash from my parents, but it never came. Which meant one of two things. Either he hadn't told them, or he had and they chose not to get involved. Either way, I kept moving. Around this time, I began building something bigger, something more permanent. I'd been developing a side project for months. A digital tutoring platform for underfunded schools in rural areas. It started as a class assignment, but had grown into something real. With the help of a friend from the business department, we built a prototype. Applied for funding. Got approved. Won a pitch contest. By May, we had a small grant, 2 interns, and a partnership offer from a nonprofit I'd admired for years. And here's the thing. My name was attached to all of it. Not buried in the footnotes. Not hidden behind someone else's glow. Mine. But I still hadn't said a word to my family. I watched from the sidelines as they poured more money into Caleb's college prep, new laptop, new furniture for his dorm, even a weekend retreat to clear his head before finals. Meanwhile, I paid off the last of my rent and bought a secondhand suit for professional meetings. I wasn't flashy. I didn't post about it. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about letting them underestimate me just long enough. Then the perfect opportunity presented itself. And I couldn't have scripted it better if I tried. Caleb got into my university. They were over the moon. My mom called and left a voicemail crying with joy. My dad sent a group text about the boys being reunited. Caleb even texted me directly, acting like we were on great terms again. Looks like I'll be crashing your turf soon. Maybe you can show me the ropes. I stared at that message for a long time. Because he had no idea what kind of ground he was stepping on. The first day of orientation was approaching. I'd already volunteered to help run the student panels that week. I had access to the speaker list, the student guides, the welcoming packets. I knew everything about who was coming, what they'd be doing, and how to steer things in interesting directions. And I was ready to use it. Not out of pettiness. Out of precision. Because if they were going to spend years pretending I was invisible, then I was going to show them what invisible can do. Orientation week arrived with all the chaotic energy of a theme park on opening day. New students wandering campus with wide eyes, parents hauling suitcases, campus guides barking directions with barely concealed exhaustion. I'd volunteered to be part of the Student Success Panel, a carefully curated group of upperclassmen meant to inspire and reassure freshmen and their families. We were asked to share our stories, how we overcame obstacles, found community, and succeeded academically. It was supposed to be wholesome, uplifting. Instead, I turned it into something else entirely. My moment. The event took place in the university's main auditorium, packed with incoming students and their parents. I recognized Caleb's voice before I saw him, shouting something about parking to my mom. Sure enough, there they were. Caleb in his designer sneakers, mom in a bright floral cardigan, and dad scanning the crowd like he owned the place. They didn't see me on stage until I stood to speak. I was the final student on the panel. The moderator handed me the mic and smiled. Lucas, you're one of our research fellows and scholarship recipients. Why don't you tell everyone how you got here? I took a breath, steadying my heartbeat. Of course. I'd love to. I told the truth. Not the clean, curated version, the real one. I wasn't supposed to make it here, I said, pacing slowly across the stage. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I didn't have the support most students take for granted. I watched as some parents glanced at each other. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My younger brother, who's here today, actually got a full ride from our parents. They bought him a car at 16, gave him a college fund, celebrated every win, big or small. I got a lecture on how they didn't think I'd ever amount to much. Gasps. A few chuckles of disbelief. I worked 2 jobs to get here. I lived off instant noodles and kept my grades up while barely sleeping. Not because I was special, because I had no other option. But the thing is, I paused, locking eyes with Caleb in the 4th row. Pressure either breaks you or sharpens you. I chose to get sharper. The moderator tried to gently nudge me back to a lighter tone, but I waved her off with a smile. Sorry, this is important. There are students in this audience right now who think they don't belong here, who were told they'd never be enough. I'm here to say that they're wrong. You do belong. You can thrive. And you don't need anyone's permission to prove it. The applause was awkward at first. Then it grew. My professors clapped. The faculty coordinator nodded. Even the moderator had to admit it was powerful. My parents sat stone-faced, completely blindsided. Caleb stared at the floor. And that was only the beginning. After the panel, parents and students mingled with the speakers. A few kids came up to shake my hand. One mother hugged me and whispered, "My son needed to hear that." Meanwhile, Caleb ghosted the crowd and disappeared somewhere behind the auditorium, probably hoping to avoid the fallout. But I wasn't done yet. I had one last card to play. That afternoon, a reception was held for families of students receiving academic honors or leadership positions. It was invitation only, and Caleb wasn't on the list. But I was. And this year, I wasn't attending solo. See, I had sent 2 invitations of my own. One went to my favorite professor, who'd mentored me since my 2nd semester and treated me like an equal. The other? To Mr. Baines, the high school guidance counselor who once told me I wasn't competitive enough for college. He showed up, shocked, impressed, and graying at the temples. "Lucas," he said, shaking my hand. "I can't believe this. You look successful." "I am," I said plainly. "And I remember everything you said to me, by the way." He laughed nervously, but I just smiled and walked away. My parents arrived late. I could tell from their expressions they weren't expecting the red carpet. They thought it would be some casual meet and greet, not a catered event with media booths, donors, and a slideshow featuring student achievements. And on that slideshow, on the largest screen in the room, was a slide that read, "Lucas Monroe, Research Fellow, Co-Founder, Equi-Tutor, funded by the Blake Foundation. Academic Excellence Award. Invited Speaker, Student Leadership Panel. First-Generation College Student." I watched my mother's mouth fall open as the slide cycled past. My father blinked slowly, like trying to reboot his brain. They had no idea who I'd become. And just when I thought that was enough, fate handed me one more gift. A local journalist covering the orientation week asked to interview me. Just a short feature on student resilience. I agreed. The article went online 2 days later. It opened with my quote. "My parents told me they never saved for college because they didn't think I'd actually go." That moment broke something in me, but it also lit a fire. The piece went viral on campus. And by the end of the week, I got a message from Caleb. "You embarrassed the entire family. You didn't have to drag us through the mud like that." I replied. I didn't name names. If they recognized themselves in my story, that's on them. He left me on read. A few days later, my mom tried calling. I let it ring. Then another message came through. "We're sorry if we ever made you feel lesser. That was never our intention." I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say. Because the truth is, I didn't do any of this for revenge, not really. That was just the fuel I needed to keep going when everything felt hopeless. The real victory was becoming someone I was proud of. I graduated a year later with honors. Got a job offer from a tech education nonprofit. Moved into a small apartment with hardwood floors and a view of the city. And when I sent out graduation announcements, I included a photo of me standing in front of the auditorium, in the same suit I wore the day of that panel. No note, no card, just the photo. My parents didn't reply, but I know they saw it. And that was enough. I built my future from the ground up, with no safety net, no cheering section, and no shortcuts. And now, Every time I walk into a boardroom or speak to a struggling student, I carry that memory with me, not as a scar, but as proof that I was never the disappointment. They just couldn't see past their own expectations. When you grow up in a family business, your childhood doesn't come with bedtime stories and scraped knees. It comes with inventory sheets, customer complaints, and the smell of printer ink and breakroom coffee that somehow seeps into your clothes like smoke. My name's Adam. I'm 32, and I've been involved in my parents' company for as long as I can remember. Not because they made me, but because I wanted to. I thought we were building something together, something that would one day be mine, or at least something we'd share. But I was wrong. So wrong. The business is a mid-sized printing company that my dad started in the late 80s with one beat-up Xerox and a garage full of boxes. Over time, it grew. We got contracts with local law firms, schools, real estate offices. My mom handled the books. My dad ran operations. And me? I started sweeping the floor when I was 11. By the time I was in high school, I knew how to fix jammed rollers faster than the techs. I learned how to balance ledgers, build client relationships, pitch to executives. I did it all, not because I was pressured to, but because it mattered to me. Because it was our family's legacy. And then there was Sarah. Sarah is my younger sister by 5 years. She's always been different. Where I was quiet, she was loud. Where I worked behind the scenes, she liked to be front and center. She was the kind of kid who'd get praised just for showing up, while I had to prove myself over and over again. I don't say that with bitterness. At least, I didn't for most of my life. I just thought that was the way families worked. Some people shine in the spotlight, others keep the lights on. I never expected applause. I just wanted respect. After college, I came back home and joined the company full-time. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the rhythm of it. The early mornings, the regulars who came in like clockwork, the smell of fresh ink, the way my dad would nod at me across the warehouse floor after we landed a new client. We were growing. I spearheaded a push into digital printing, set up a new CRM system, built long-term client relationships that brought in over $500,000 in recurring contracts. Sarah, meanwhile, went to school for communications, then marketing, then, briefly, psychology. She bounced around between degrees, jobs, and cities, always chasing something shinier. She'd come home for the holidays, toss out big ideas no one asked for, and disappear again. Once, she told me I should rebrand the entire business for Gen Z. When I asked what that even meant for a commercial printing company, she just rolled her eyes and called me so literal. Still, I didn't mind. She was my sister. We were different, but family's family. Then, 2 years ago, she moved back. No warning. No big family meeting. Just showed up one day at the shop wearing heels that clicked too loud and carrying a laptop she never opened. She told my parents she wanted to help grow the brand. Said she had ideas. Big ones. They smiled like she was Moses descending from the mountain. I didn't think much of it at first. Let her try, I figured. She'd lose interest eventually. Except she didn't. She started showing up to meetings she wasn't invited to, criticizing long-standing clients for not matching our brand aesthetic, talking over me in front of staff, suggesting we phase out long-time vendors I had spent years building trust with. My parents, especially my mom, ate it up. Isn't she so innovative, they'd say. She has such a natural flair for business. Natural flair? She'd never even set up a PO before. The real kicker came one Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of negotiating a complicated contract renewal with a client we'd had for over a decade, one that would secure 6 figures in revenue over 3 years. I had spent weeks preparing, and then Sarah walked into the room, latte in hand, and interrupted the meeting to pitch a completely unrelated branding package she had mocked up in Canva the night before. The client was polite but confused. I was livid. After the call, I asked her, quietly, calmly, not to undermine me again during a negotiation. Her response? Relax, Adam. You're good with the numbers. I'm good with people. We make a great team. It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. Like I was some bean-counting footnote in her big success story. Like all the years I had spent grinding meant nothing next to her Instagram-friendly marketing slogans and hand gestures. I brought it up to my parents. Told them we needed clearer roles. That I respected Sarah's ideas, but she was disrupting long-term operations. My dad looked uncomfortable. My mom just shook her head. She's just trying to help. Don't be so territorial. Territorial. That word sat with me like a brick in my stomach. I wasn't being territorial. I was protecting the business. Our business. But something had shifted. Suddenly, Sarah was the star. I was the technician. The background guy. The boring brother. Things got worse from there. She started hosting weekly staff meetings without me. Made changes to the company website. Took credit for a referral program I had designed a year earlier. I tried to stay calm. Professional. I told myself the truth would win out. That my parents would see the results, the loyalty of our clients, the systems I had built. But they didn't want to see. Then came the bombshell. It was a Friday afternoon, a week before the end of the quarter. My parents called me into their office. I thought it was to discuss numbers or projections. Instead, they sat me down, side by side, eyes filled with something between pity and rehearsed resolution. "We've been thinking," my dad started, "about the future of the company." I nodded, expecting a conversation about growth, maybe expansion. "And we've decided," my mom said, "that Sarah is better suited to take over." The room went quiet. "Take over what?" I asked. "The business," my dad said softly. "You're great at what you do, Adam. You've kept the wheels turning. But leadership requires something else. Charisma. Vision. You've always been a bit more comfortable in the background." I felt the ground tilt under me. "Are you serious?" "She just connects with people so naturally," my mom added. "You're so technical. She's the face." I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. I felt like I was watching my own funeral. After everything I'd done. The sacrifices. The loyalty. The years I gave up dating, traveling, even hobbies, because I was building this thing with them. And now, I was being shoved aside. Politely. Quietly. Because I wasn't shiny enough. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out. Packed my things that night. Cleared my desk. Turned in my keys. I didn't say goodbye. And I didn't plan on coming back. But funny thing about the face of the business. Sometimes, clients don't care about the face. They care about the hands. The ones who did the work, built the trust, kept their promises. And it didn't take long before cracks started to show. That's when things got interesting. I wish I could say I walked away with a clean break. That I packed up my car, blasted some Freedom playlist, and hit the open road without looking back. But the truth is, I didn't go anywhere. I moved into a small rental apartment about 15 minutes away, the kind with cracked tile and a faint smell of old carpet. I didn't leave town. I didn't want to. This was still my home. My clients. My network. The relationships I built. I wasn't ready to disappear just because my parents decided I didn't have the right personality for their shiny new vision. The first week after I left the business was weird. Really weird. My phone was oddly quiet. No last-minute calls from a stressed client. No requests for quotes. No supply chain issues. I didn't realize how much my identity had been tied up in the constant, low-level chaos of the company until it was gone. It felt like the silence after a fire drill, unnerving. Then on day 6, I got an email. It was from one of our largest clients, a real estate development firm that had been with us since I was a teenager. I had personally handled every project for them for the past 5 years. The subject line read, "Quick check-in." I opened it expecting a question about an order or maybe a follow-up on their last delivery. But it wasn't that. It was a polite, slightly confused message asking if I was still with the company. Apparently, they'd tried to reach me, but Sarah had told them I was no longer involved in client-facing matters. The email ended with a subtle but unmistakable hint. "If you're available for freelance consultation, we'd love to catch up." I didn't respond right away. Not out of pettiness. Honestly, I didn't know what to say. Technically, I had no non-compete. No employment contract. I'd always been treated more like a family obligation than a formal employee. So I sat on the message, read it 5 more times, then shut my laptop and went for a walk. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing my parents' words on repeat. "You're just not a people person." And wondering how many people I'd kept happy over the years without any of them noticing. All those nights staying late to fix a job that jammed. All those holiday weekends I skipped so we wouldn't miss a deadline. Did none of that matter? Apparently not. By the start of the second week, the calls started coming in. Quiet ones. Awkward ones. "Hey Adam, weird question, but did you leave the company? I called the office and your sister said everything's being restructured. What's going on?" One by one, clients I had worked with for years started reaching out, trying to make sense of what happened. I didn't badmouth anyone. I didn't explain. I just told them the truth. I wasn't with the company anymore, and no, I didn't know what their next steps were. That was all I said. And that was all it took. By the end of the second week, I heard through the grapevine that one of our most loyal clients had pulled out of their contract. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. It felt sad. Like watching your childhood home slowly burn down while the new owners insisted everything was just fine. Then came the texts. First from a warehouse employee I used to eat lunch with every Wednesday. Then from a customer service rep. Then from one of the sales guys. Same story, different details. Sarah was changing everything. Shifting vendors. Rebranding our logo into something sleek and minimalist that looked like a tech startup. Laying off 2 part-time drivers because she thought outsourcing deliveries would be more agile. They told me morale was tanking. That Sarah had started holding all-staff meetings where she used words like synergy and market disruption, and no one knew what the meetings were actually about. My dad had taken a back seat, barely coming in. My mom was mostly busy posting filtered team photos on the company's new Instagram page with captions like fresh energy at our core and family business reimagined. One day, a staff member texted me a photo. It was a whiteboard with a new slogan written in marker, "Not your dad's print shop." That one stung more than I expected. I didn't say anything publicly, but inside, something started to twist. Not rage exactly, more like betrayal layered with disbelief. How had they erased me so easily? How could my own family let this happen? Then, as if the universe wanted to add insult to injury, I got an invitation. A printed one. Glossy cardstock. Embossed logo. You're invited to celebrate the new era of company name. Join us for an exclusive rebranding launch party. My name was printed on the envelope, but the greeting was generic. No note from my parents. No mention of my years of work. Just a flyer inviting me to come admire my sister's shiny new empire. I didn't go, but someone who did go told me how Sarah gave a speech. Talked about transformational leadership, the next generation, and how she stepped in to help modernize a legacy system that had stagnated. No mention of the fact that she'd only been there for a few months. No mention of me at all. That was the moment I realized they weren't just moving forward without me. They were rewriting the story. The next week, I ran into my mom at the grocery store. It was awkward. She acted surprised, like she hadn't expected to see me in the frozen foods aisle of our local market, even though we both lived 10 minutes apart. Adam. Oh, honey, how are you? I gave her a polite nod, asked how things were going. They're going well, she said, a little too quickly. Sarah's really coming into her own. She has such a gift for leadership. The staff just loves her. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She hesitated, then shifted her smile into something more strained. Well, she's still learning. But she has the vision, you know? That spark. And what about the 2 drivers she let go? Or the client that just pulled out last week? Her face flickered. Transitions are always bumpy, Adam. You know that. I wanted to ask her something. Anything that might reveal a crack in the story. Some sign that they missed me. That they realized what they'd done. Instead, she patted my arm and said, "You were always so dependable. We're just giving Sarah a chance to grow. You understand, right?" And there it was again. The way they framed it. Like I was the sturdy training wheels they'd finally outgrown. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, stared at the ceiling, and let the weight of it all settle on me. I wasn't just cut out. I was replaced. Forgotten. Rewritten. But I wasn't gone. I had options. I had contacts. I had half a dozen former clients quietly asking if I was considering freelance work. And for the first time in weeks, I started to think, maybe I should say yes. Not for revenge. Not out of spite. But because I couldn't watch them ruin what we built without doing something. That same week, I got a LinkedIn message from a mid-level marketing manager at one of our oldest clients. She was polite but direct. "Hey Adam, not sure what's going on with the company, but we've noticed some quality issues with the last few orders. Would love to chat if you're available." I met her for coffee. No suits. No contracts. Just 2 people talking honestly. She told me they were considering pulling out. That Sarah had missed 3 deadlines in 2 weeks. That their rep had changed twice in a month. That she felt like the company no longer valued the relationship. I nodded, listened, and finally said, "I'm considering starting something new. Smaller. Focused. Relationship-based." Her eyes lit up. "If you do, let us know. We'd switch tomorrow." I didn't sleep that night either, but for a different reason. That was the first domino. Others followed. One by one, calls trickled in. People who had worked with me for years wanted updates. Some wanted to vent. Some wanted advice. A few just wanted to know if I was okay. I wasn't planning anything yet. But then I heard what Sarah did next. And that's when things truly crossed a line. It was late October when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn that brilliant red gold that always makes you feel like maybe the world isn't so bad after all. I remember because I was walking through the park near my apartment, earbuds in, trying to clear my head, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jamie, one of the few people still working at the print shop who hadn't completely drunk the Sarah Kool-Aid. Jamie, you're not gonna like this. Check your inbox. I stopped walking. The wind blew a swirl of leaves around my feet. I stood there for a minute, staring at my phone before I even opened my email app. Subject: New company press release. Internal announcement only. I clicked it, and there it was. A full-page announcement, dressed up in corporate buzzwords and faux inspirational quotes about the company's next phase of transformation. But buried in the second paragraph was the knife. To honor our new direction and leadership, we're excited to unveil the rebranding of our company, effective immediately. Company name will now operate under the new name, S. Hart Creative Solutions. S. Hart, as in Sarah Hart, my sister. She didn't just rename the company. She named it after herself. I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing until I felt my lungs start to ache. I stood there, rooted to the sidewalk like someone had punched me in the ribs. The same company my dad built from scratch in the 80s. The same company I helped modernize, expand, and hold together through recessions, client losses, supply chain nightmares, and everything in between. The same company where I once spent the entire Christmas Eve fixing a last-minute job so a client could get his order in time for a charity event. Gone. Not even a trace of the original name. She had rewritten history again. Only this time, she put her name on the cover. I didn't go home right away. I wandered the neighborhood in a kind of daze, walking nowhere in particular. At some point, I realized I was near the old strip mall where Dad's original shop used to be, back when it was just him and a single copier in a rented unit with flickering lights and half a parking lot. I stood in front of the vacant space for a long time. S. Hart Creative Solutions. It sounded like an influencer brand, not a family business, not something built with decades of sweat, missed birthdays, and 6 a.m. coffee-fueled deliveries. I got home late that night. I didn't answer texts, didn't eat. I just sat at my desk, staring at the blinking cursor on a blank document. The next day, I heard from a former client, my favorite actually, a small publishing house that did limited-run memoirs and community history projects. They were always kind, thoughtful, old school in the best way. Adam, I don't want to put you in a weird position, their founder told me over the phone, but your sister sent us a pitch for a total rebrand of our books. Said the new company direction didn't align with our current aesthetic. She implied, we might not be a good fit anymore. I felt something twist in my chest. She said that. Well, not in so many words. But it was clear. She kept talking about modernity, trendiness, next-gen visual identity. You know how our work isn't about that. We preserve memories. That's the whole point. I swallowed hard. Did she cancel your contract? No. But she told us the pricing structure would change significantly going forward, and that we might want to consider alternative service providers if we couldn't adapt. It hit me like a freight train. She was pushing them out, pushing out the clients she didn't like, the ones that didn't fit her brand, the ones who'd been with us for decades, who kept us afloat through thin years, slow seasons, and startup competition, the ones I had built long-standing, personal relationships with. And she was doing it deliberately. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay awake thinking about all the clients we used to hand-deliver proofs to, the mom-and-pop real estate agencies who treated us like family, the little local schools we printed yearbooks for even when their budgets were tight, the nonprofits who couldn't afford full services, but we helped anyway. She was erasing them, erasing us. And that's when I did something I hadn't done since I left. I went back, not to the office, but to the building. I parked across the street in my car, late in the evening, and just watched. The lights were on. A few employees were still working, new faces I didn't recognize. Then I saw Sarah walk out. She was wearing a bright orange blazer, talking animatedly on the phone, laughing. She didn't even look back at the building, just hopped into her car and drove off like she owned the world. Because she did. For now. 2 days later, I got another text from Jamie. This one just said, she's claiming she built the CRM from scratch. Said the old system was non-existent before her. That's when I lost it. I don't mean I screamed or threw something. I mean something inside me, something that had still been holding on to hope, finally snapped. She was lying. Boldly, openly, taking credit for everything I had built over a decade. Not just the client relationships, not just the day-to-day operations, but the very system that had kept the company organized and running. The thing I stayed up nights customizing, debugging, training staff to use. And she said it didn't exist before her. It was like watching someone rob your house, set it on fire, and then blame you for not decorating it properly. I decided I needed to talk to my parents. Not to yell, not to argue, just to know, to hear it from them, to ask them how far they were willing to let this go. I called. My mom answered. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, can I come by? Just to talk. Of course. You know you're always welcome. But I didn't feel welcome the moment I stepped through that door. There was something in the air, strained politeness. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. We sat in the living room. I asked them, flat out. Did you know Sarah renamed the company after herself? They glanced at each other. It was her idea, my dad finally said, shifting in his seat. She's trying to create a more modern brand identity. Something that reflects her leadership. I blinked. Her leadership? My mom nodded slowly. She's the CEO now, Adam. That comes with creative direction. I stared at them. Do you even hear yourselves? You gave her the company. She's rewriting history. She's lying about the systems. She's pushing out old clients. She's innovating, my mom corrected gently. You always said the business needed to evolve. That's not what this is, I said, my voice sharper now. You know it. She's cutting out the heart of everything we built. She's burning the bridges we spent years building. And you're letting her. My dad looked tired. Older than I remembered. It's not that simple, Adam. She has investors now. People interested in expansion. She said the legacy model was too dependent on outdated relationships. Outdated? I nearly laughed. Those outdated relationships were loyal. They carried us through the pandemic. They trusted us. And now you're trading them in for Instagram posts and buzzwords. Silence. Then my mom said the words I'll never forget. She's the future, Adam. You're the past. It didn't matter what I said after that. Nothing would land. They'd made their choice. They weren't just standing by. They were complicit. I stood up. My legs felt shaky. I hope you enjoy your new creative solutions. But don't expect me to pretend this didn't happen. My mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. But something about the quiet way I left made it worse, I think. Because 3 days later, I got a legal notice. A letter from a law firm I recognized. Sarah had worked with them briefly during her third attempt at a communications degree. The letter was polite, but clear. They were formally requesting that I cease and desist from contacting former clients of Heart Creative Solutions. The letter accused me of intellectual property interference, claimed that my attempts to solicit business could be seen as an infringement of company rights. I sat there reading the letter over and over, my hands numb. She wasn't just trying to erase me anymore. She was trying to silence me. I didn't tell anyone about the letter at first. I just stared at it. 3 pages of carefully constructed legal phrasing, dressed up in cold professionalism, but unmistakably laced with Sarah's fingerprints. It didn't scream, "We're suing you," but it whispered something worse. "We want to make your life difficult. We want you scared. We want you quiet." And the most painful part? It was signed by a firm that I had once brought in for a contract review during our first major commercial lease agreement. I had worked side by side with one of the partners. I'd given them business, introduced them to my parents. They used to send me holiday cards. Now they were sending me threats. I remember just sitting there in my kitchen, the letter spread across the table, my dinner untouched, and going cold. My apartment felt too small, too quiet. Even the ticking of the cheap wall clock started to sound like mockery. Every minute that passed was another reminder of how far things had fallen. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was just hollow. I had been pushed out of my own legacy, replaced in the story by someone who barely knew how the machines worked. My parents, my own parents, had chosen the easier option, the flashier one, the one who didn't ask uncomfortable questions or remind them of the sacrifices it took to build something real. Sarah didn't want a business. She wanted an aesthetic, and the cost of that aesthetic was me. I didn't reply to the letter. Not right away. I called a lawyer friend instead, Nathan, someone I'd known from college who now worked in small business law. We met for coffee, and I slid the letter across the table without saying a word. He read it once, then again. He didn't say much at first. Finally, he looked up. "They're trying to intimidate you." I nodded. "Can they actually do anything?" "Well," he tapped the last paragraph. "There's no employment contract. No signed non-compete. Technically, unless you're actively stealing proprietary information or using their client list, they don't have much ground." "I'm not doing any of that," I said. "These are people who contacted me. I didn't reach out first." "Then you're fine. Legally, anyway. Morally? That's a whole other battlefield." He paused. "Are you going to fight this?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because at that moment, I didn't know which answer was worse. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, arms crossed over my chest like a man trying to stay still while the house collapses around him. And slowly, an even more painful truth settled in. They weren't just trying to silence me. They expected me to disappear, to just fade, and I was dangerously close to letting them. The days that followed were heavy. I stopped taking most calls. I told the few clients still reaching out that I needed time. I stopped responding to texts from Jamie and others who were still trying to keep me looped in. I didn't check LinkedIn, didn't check email. I even let my car sit in the driveway for 4 days without moving it. For the first time in years, I had no work, no team, no purpose. I remember sitting in the park one afternoon, watching an older couple play chess at one of those concrete tables. The guy was slowly dragging his bishop across the board like it mattered more than anything else in the world. I watched them for almost an hour, just sitting there, numb. And then the guy made a move, looked up, and said something I couldn't hear, but his opponent laughed. Not a fake laugh, a real one. Easy, familiar. And I don't know why, but something about that laugh broke something in me. Because I realized I couldn't even remember the last time I laughed like that. Everything in my life had become so wrapped up in the business. In being useful, in being needed. I didn't know who I was without it, but I was starting to. One small piece at a time. It started with a notebook. Not a laptop, not a spreadsheet. Just a simple, spiral-bound notebook I found in the back of a drawer. I took it to the coffee shop down the street one morning and just started writing. Not planning, not plotting revenge, just writing. I wrote about how I used to help my dad load the ink drums when I was 12. About the time I stayed up until 3 a.m. designing a rush order for a wedding that had been rescheduled after a hurricane. About the client who brought me cookies every December for 10 years because I once caught a typo in her church bulletin the night before printing. Little things. Moments. Things that Sarah didn't know about, didn't care about, because to her the business was about branding and press releases and synergy. To me, it was about people. After a few days of this, I started writing down names. Not clients, relationships. Who had I helped? Who had I solved problems for? Who had I shown up for, over and over, when no one else would? The list was longer than I expected. By the end of the week, I had 10 names circled. Not as targets. Not as leads. Just people who mattered. People who might want to build something better. Something real. That weekend, I got a voicemail from my dad. I hadn't spoken to him since the living room conversation. His voice was careful. Tired. "Hey, Adam. I just wanted to check in. I know things have been difficult. I don't really know what to say, but your mom and I, well, we're just hoping you're okay. Maybe we can talk soon." He didn't mention the rebrand. Didn't mention the cease and desist. Didn't apologize. And for once, I didn't feel an urge to call back. Because I knew what would happen. We'd talk. He'd say something vague about moving on, and I'd pretend to be okay, and the cycle would start again. So I didn't call. I didn't need their permission anymore. Instead, I started to walk every morning. It became a ritual. Up at 7, out the door by 7:30, coffee in hand. I didn't check email before I left. I didn't bring work with me. I just walked. And slowly, the noise in my head began to quiet. I started reading again. Books I hadn't touched in years. Fiction. Business memoirs. Even some old printer manuals. Don't ask me why. There was something comforting about it. Like relearning a language you once spoke fluently. Then one night, I got a call from Mrs. Alvarez. She was the founder of the nonprofit we used to print holiday cards for every year. She was in her 70s now. Kind, stubborn, sharp as ever. "Adam," she said without preamble, "I heard what they did." I stayed quiet. "I don't care about their branding. I care about how you always answered the phone, even on a Sunday. I care about how you found a way to deliver a last-minute job the day before Christmas Eve because our delivery van broke down. I care about people, not logos. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thanks, Mrs. Alvarez. That means more than you know. Well, she said, I've got a list of things I need printed. If you're not too busy being a hermit, maybe we can talk. We met for lunch 2 days later. She wasn't the only one. By mid-November, 4 more clients had quietly reached out. No drama, no declarations, just subtle messages, asking if I might consider starting something, if I might want to work together again, if I could help. I still hadn't made a decision. Not fully, but I was closer. And then one morning, as I sat in that same coffee shop with my notebook, Jamie walked in. He saw me before I saw him. Walked straight over. Hey, he said. Hey. He sat down across from me without asking. Looked exhausted. You won't believe what happened. I raised an eyebrow. What now? He took a deep breath. Sarah just fired Kevin. He's been there since your dad opened the second location. 20 years. Said he was undermining the new vision. I blinked. Kevin? He's the most loyal guy on staff. Jamie nodded. She's cleaning house. Anyone who questions her? Gone. Doesn't matter how long they've been there. I stared at my notebook. She's not running a business, I said quietly. She's running a cult. Jamie hesitated, then leaned in. If you started something, just saying, there are a lot of people who'd follow. I didn't answer. Not yet. But later that night, I opened my laptop, created a new folder, titled it Second Draft. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was writing my story again. I didn't announce it to anyone. No social media posts. No big declarations. No LinkedIn job title change with a bunch of fake humility like, excited to start this new chapter, grateful for all the lessons. I wasn't doing this for applause. I was doing it because I couldn't not do it anymore. The first thing I did was rent a tiny office space in the same strip mall where my dad's original print shop once stood. It felt poetic in a way, returning to the roots while they chased after something shiny. The place was cheap, barely 500 square feet, and smelled faintly of bleach and old drywall. But it had a window, a real window, and when I opened it, I could hear the faint hum of traffic and birds, like the city itself was whispering, "Welcome back." I didn't have a business name yet, didn't have a logo, a website, or even a business card, but I had a phone, and a chair, and a second-hand desk with a scratch across the top that looked like a lightning bolt. I sat down and made a list. Clients I trust, people I respect, things I won't compromise on. That last one was the most important, because if I was going to rebuild, I was going to do it on my terms. No slogans, no hollow branding, just good work, honest relationships, and zero tolerance for people who valued optics over substance. I named the company Redline Printworks. Simple, a nod to the margin of a page, the place where most people stop, but where I planned to begin. Word spread slowly at first, just a whisper here and there, a forwarded email, a casual mention during a networking event. But within 2 weeks, I had 5 former clients scheduling meetings. By week 3, I was scrambling to keep up with orders using a single rented copier and late-night runs to the 24-hour supply warehouse. It wasn't glamorous. I was doing everything, quotes, production, deliveries. Some days I was elbow-deep in toner dust. Other days I was hunched over my laptop building invoice templates from scratch. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't dragging myself out of bed. I wanted to work. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing even. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. And now I could finally breathe. By the end of the first month, I had 12 active clients, 9 of which were former accounts that had quietly left us. Heart Creative Solutions without making a scene. They didn't want to be part of whatever rebranding circus Sarah was running. They just wanted someone they could rely on. Someone who remembered the small stuff. That was me. Always had been. I hired my first employee in month 2. A part-time admin named Chloe who'd previously interned at the old shop before Sarah phased out the internship program for being too analog. Chloe was smart, fast, and organized in a way that made me wonder why she wasn't running her own company. She handled the back end so I could focus on the clients. A month later, I brought in Kevin. Yep, that Kevin. 20-year veteran, quietly fired for undermining Sarah's vision. When he showed up to our first lunch meeting, he looked tired, defeated, like someone who'd been tossed out of his own family. I didn't pitch him. I just told him what I was building. At the end of the conversation, he said, "You let me do the logistics and workflow. You don't need to pay me much. I just want to do real work again." He started the next day. By the end of month 3, we'd outgrown the tiny office. I rented a larger unit, still humble, but with room for 2 copiers, a cutting machine, and a break area that doubled as a second desk when needed. We painted the walls ourselves one weekend. Chloe brought muffins. Kevin made a playlist. It felt less like a business and more like a team. And then came the phone call that changed everything. It was from a guy named Warren Blake, VP of Marketing at one of the largest commercial developers in the region. We'd worked with them years ago at my parents' shop. Warren and I had built a good rapport back then, but he went quiet after the rebrand. He opened the call with a laugh. "So, I hear you're back in the game." I chuckled. "I guess the rumors are true. Got a question for you," he said. "Can you handle a 10,000-piece campaign with variable data printing, staggered delivery to 12 regional offices, and a 2-week turnaround?" I nearly dropped the phone. I took a breath. "If I say yes, you'll give me the job?" "I've seen what the other shop's doing," he said, voice suddenly flat. "Late deliveries, wrong formatting, and the last set came with a typo on the cover page. I miss working with someone who triple-checks the details." We delivered the project a day early. After that, it snowballed. Warren referred us to 2 other companies. One of them referred us to 3 more. Suddenly, I wasn't chasing work. It was finding me. I started getting emails from people who didn't even know me directly, just of me. "Heard you're the guy who gets it done. Someone said you're the print whisperer. Saw your work on the Jones campaign. Need something like that, but faster." I kept the team small, lean. I didn't want to grow too fast and become what I'd walked away from. But I made one rule. Everyone who works here knows the clients by name. No automated phone trees. No copy-pasted emails. We knew our people, their preferences, their quirks. We'd send handwritten thank yous after big jobs. Toss in free samples of new stock when we tried it out. Every client felt like they mattered, because they did. Meanwhile, whispers started floating in from the other side of town. The rebranded Heart Creative Solutions wasn't going well. Sarah had tried to position the business as a creative lifestyle brand, whatever that meant. She hired a flashy branding agency to redo the website, plastered with glossy photos of sleek desks and air plants. But behind the scenes, morale was crumbling. Jamie texted occasionally with updates. 3 more longtime employees had left. Turnover in the customer service team was a revolving door. Orders were late. Clients were confused by the rebrand and unsure who to contact anymore. But the worst part? Clients were leaving, and no one knew where they were going. They didn't know because no one was saying it out loud. They were coming to me. Quietly. Steadily. One day, Jamie called and said, she held a meeting and accused the staff of sabotage. Said someone must be leaking client info. I laughed. I haven't asked for a single client. They came on their own. He paused. I know, but she doesn't understand that. She thinks it's all about marketing and image. She doesn't get that it's about trust. By the 6-month mark, Redline Printworks had a wait list. An actual wait list. We were booked solid for 3 weeks out. I had to rent a 3rd printer and lease warehouse space for overflow storage. I was working longer hours than ever, but I didn't feel drained. I felt alive. My parents hadn't reached out since the voicemail. No apology. No explanation. But one Saturday morning, I got an email from my mom. Just one line. Your father isn't sleeping. That was it. No greeting. No signature. Just that sentence. And it hit me harder than I expected. Because part of me, a very small part, still wanted to believe they'd come around. That they'd see the mistake. That maybe this was all some grand misunderstanding, and they'd finally say, we're sorry. We were wrong. But I knew better. Some people don't apologize. They just suffer quietly and hope someone else breaks first. I wasn't going to be that person. I had broken before, but not anymore. I was standing now. And then, one day, the call I never expected came in. It was from Sarah. The caller ID popped up while I was in the middle of reviewing proofs with Chloe. I stared at the screen for a long second before excusing myself and stepping into the hallway. I answered. Hello. Silence. Then, Adam. Hi. Her voice was strained. Polite. Not warm. I didn't think you'd pick up, she added quickly. What do you need? There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the distant hum of what sounded like an air purifier. We're in a bit of a tight spot, she said. And I thought maybe we could talk. I leaned against the wall. Talk, I repeated. Just, maybe see if there's a way to, I don't know, work together? I know we had our differences, but things have changed. I've changed. I nearly laughed. But I didn't. I just said one word. What happened? She hesitated. And that's when I heard it in her voice, not the spin, not the polished facade, but fear, real fear. Something had gone wrong, something big, and she needed help. But she didn't know the worst part yet. I wasn't coming back, because I wasn't hers to call anymore, and I was just getting started. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there in the hallway of my shop, listening to the soft static hum of Sarah's hesitation on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her clenching her jaw, trying to decide if she should soften her tone or double down. For a moment, I said nothing, and the silence stretched so long it almost became its own statement. Finally, I spoke. You said you wanted to talk, I said calmly. So talk. She jumped on the invitation like she'd been holding her breath. Look, she said, I know things didn't go the way they should have. I know we had our issues, but I think we're both in a position now where we can. No. I cut her off, not with anger but with clarity. You're in a position. I'm in a business. Another long pause. Adam, come on, she sighed. Do you really want to keep doing this? It's just pride at this point. We're family. I felt a muscle in my cheek twitch. Family. That word had started to sound less like comfort and more like a smokescreen. You want something, I said, and you're hoping I forgot everything that happened. I haven't. Her tone stiffened. Fine. The truth is, we lost 3 of our biggest contracts in the past 2 months. Projects are behind. We've had multiple returns. I've had to do damage control just to keep us afloat. Our margins are underwater, and why are you telling me this? Because I need help. There it was. The truth. Plain, bitter, and oddly satisfying. She needed me now. The same person she'd erased, replaced, branded as obsolete. The irony could have filled a billboard. I leaned against the wall, watching Chloe through the window as she laughed with Kevin over something on his tablet. I'm booked out for the next 6 weeks, I said evenly. Even if I wanted to help, which I don't have the bandwidth. Adam, I'm not asking for a handout. Then what are you asking for? She hesitated again, and I swear I could hear her pride crack just a little more. A merger, she said finally. That caught me off guard. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. A merger. Redline has the clients, the trust, the execution. Hart has the brand equity, the network, the infrastructure. I let out a short, humorless breath through my nose. You really believe that? She ignored the jab. We'd be stronger together. You know that. No, Sarah. You'd be stronger. I'm already strong. It hung in the air like a challenge. She didn't have a rebuttal. After a few seconds, she said, just think about it, okay? I didn't respond. I just hung up. I stood there for a minute, breathing slowly, grounding myself. Because as tempting as it was to slam the door shut forever, I had a different idea. An idea that started as a seed the second she said the word merger. I walked back into the office, where Kevin and Chloe were looking at me like kids waiting to hear if the monster under the bed was real. Well, Kevin asked. I dropped into the chair and grinned. She's drowning. Chloe raised her eyebrows. And she asked you for help? Yup. Kevin leaned forward, his face a mix of disbelief and amusement. What are you going to do? And that's when the idea solidified. I wasn't just going to leave her sinking. I was going to throw her a rope covered in hooks. I didn't respond for 2 days. Let her stew. Let the tension build. I needed her desperate enough to overlook her ego, but not so panicked she'd start looking elsewhere. Timing was key. On the 3rd day, I sent her a message. We can talk. Neutral ground. Just the 2 of us. She replied within 5 minutes. We met at a quiet coffee shop in a part of town neither of us frequented anymore. It used to be a rundown corner lot, but now it was filled with tiny boutiques and overpriced oat milk lattes. The kind of place where people wore scarves year-round and said things like, vibe check, unironically. I got there first, ordered black coffee, sat by the window. When she walked in, she looked tired. Not in the I pulled an all-nighter kind of way, but in the my world is coming apart and I can't stop it kind of way. Still, she was wearing her favorite power blazer and carrying a leather-bound planner like she was trying to project control. She sat down. No hug. No smile. Thanks for meeting me, she said. I nodded. Let's get to it, I said. Why a merger? She opened her planner like she was about to pitch to a boardroom. I let her talk about brand synergy, strategic consolidation, vertical integration. A dozen buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant very little in practice. Then she made the real pitch. You take over operations. Keep the team, the processes, the client interface. I focus on marketing, scaling, and brand partnerships. Together, we cover both sides of the business. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. Instead, I leaned in slightly and asked, "What's the debt ratio on Heart right now?" She blinked. "That's not relevant. It is if I'm absorbing it." She shifted. "We're leveraged, but..." "How leveraged?" "Moderately." I chuckled. "Define moderately." She hesitated. "About $240,000 in outstanding debt. Some short-term, some vendor credit, some equipment leases." I raised an eyebrow. "And client retention?" She hesitated again. I already knew the answer. I'd been hearing it for months through the grapevine, but I needed her to say it. "We've lost a few major accounts." "How many?" She finally looked away. 7. I sat back in my chair. Why would I take on a drowning company with 7 lost contracts and nearly $250,000 in debt? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I waited. Then, slowly, she said, "Because I'm offering 50% ownership." I kept a straight face, but inside, I was smiling. Bingo. She was offering me equal stake, thinking that was generous, without realizing she was offering me control. Because what she didn't know was that red line was already positioned to overtake her market entirely. But I wasn't just interested in a power play. I wanted something deeper. I wanted to undo what she'd done. Not just to me, but to everyone she'd steamrolled. The clients she ghosted. The staff she discarded. The legacy she twisted into something shallow and plastic. So I said the only thing she needed to hear. "I'll consider it, but only under certain conditions." Her eyes lit up, just a flicker, but she tried to hide it. "What kind of conditions?" And that's when I laid them out. Firmly, clearly, quietly. Condition 1, full financial transparency. I would bring in my own accountant to audit every aspect of Heart's books. No exceptions. Condition 2, complete operational control. I handle the day-to-day, the staffing, the client contracts. She stays out of it. Condition 3, silent equity for her, at least for the first year. No public leadership. No co-CEO nonsense. She could collect dividends, but not speak for the company. She balked. "That's not a merger. That's a takeover." I shrugged. "Call it what you want. That's the deal." She looked away, chewing the inside of her cheek. I leaned in. "You don't have time to find someone else. You know it. I'm your only way out. So you can either keep pretending you're running a company, or you can let me save it. And you." She didn't answer, but she didn't storm out either, which meant I had her. And I wasn't done yet. Over the next 2 weeks, we exchanged documents. I brought in my accountant, an old colleague named Priya who had a mind like a trap and didn't flinch at uncomfortable truths. What we found was worse than I expected. Sarah hadn't just over-leveraged the company. She'd gutted it. Over $80,000 spent on brand partnerships that amounted to nothing. For separate contracts with influencer marketing agencies that produced zero ROI. Leasing high-end equipment that sat unused because no one knew how to operate it. But the worst part? A list of laid-off employees, quietly replaced with low-cost interns or remote freelancers who had no loyalty to the company and no training. She wasn't running a business. She was running a fantasy and charging it to a company card. I met with Priya in private after the audit. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to do this?" "Yes." "You're inheriting a mess." "I know." She paused. "But you're also inheriting leverage." I nodded slowly, because she was right. I had the truth now. The financials. The proof. Everything Sarah had hidden under her sleek branding and buzzwords. I had in black and white. And I knew how to use it. But I wasn't rushing in. Not yet. This wasn't the revenge. This was the setup. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I'd make sure everyone finally saw the truth. Including her. I waited almost a month before making my move. Not because I was scared, but because timing mattered more than satisfaction. Anyone can get angry. But revenge? Real revenge takes patience. You have to let the other person believe they're safe, that things are finally settling down, that maybe you've forgiven them. That's when the ground beneath them starts to crack. And when it does, they don't even have time to brace. Sarah thought the merger was going smoothly. She signed every document Priya sent her without looking too hard, eager to check the due diligence boxes so she could move on to the next strategic initiative. Her focus was on optics, always optics. I let her host her little PR events, gave her just enough rope to keep her busy while I went to work quietly, piece by piece, underneath the surface. The first step was consolidation. Redline Printworks and Heart Creative Solutions merged under a single umbrella, Redline Creative Group, a name that sounded neutral enough for her to stomach, but close enough to my brand that people would naturally associate it with me. The paperwork clearly stated that operational control rested with me. She technically still had 50% equity, but it was silent partnership equity, meaning she couldn't make executive decisions without my approval. It was in writing. Ironclad. Priya made sure of that. The second step was rebuilding trust with the right people. I reached out to every client Heart had lost, one by one. Calmly, professionally, I told them the company had undergone new management and that my focus was on restoring quality and reliability. Some were skeptical at first, but once they realized I was involved, they returned. They didn't even need to be convinced. They'd missed the way things used to run. Meanwhile, I started quietly reinstating old employees, the ones Sarah had fired or driven away. Kevin handled logistics, Chloe oversaw admin, and I even brought back 2 designers from the early days. We were building momentum again, one brick at a time. Sarah, meanwhile, was getting restless. Every week or so, she'd drop by the office, pretending to check in. She'd parade around in her designer heels, trying to reassert her presence, but no one really listened. The staff didn't fear her anymore. They respected me. One afternoon, she waltzed into the production floor and announced, "We should rebrand again. Maybe something more digital forward." I cut her off gently but firmly. "We're not changing the name, Sarah." She blinked, half offended, half disbelieving. "You're seriously turning down a rebranding opportunity?" "The data. Clients don't want another rebrand. They want consistency," I said. "We're not doing this again." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. She just muttered something about short-term vision and left. That was when I knew the shift was complete. She wasn't steering the ship anymore. She was just a passenger. Still, I knew her well enough to expect a last-ditch attempt to claw back control. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, it came. Sarah tried to call an emergency board meeting. What she didn't realize was that there was no board. Not in the way she thought. She'd signed documents merging all governance into the new structure, with me as the sole managing director. The board she was referring to was a legal placeholder. There were no voting rights for her to exercise. She sent me a long, dramatic email that started with, "This is completely unprofessional," and ended with, "I'm going to consult my lawyer." I replied with one sentence. "You're welcome to do that, but please review Section 4.3b of the operating agreement first." She did, and she went silent for a week. While she stewed, I executed Step 3. Reputation realignment. Every client update, every invoice, every project completion, all went out under Redline Creative Group. Heart Creative Solutions ceased to exist in practice, even if it still technically existed on paper. I began transitioning vendor accounts, payroll, and tax filings under the new name. By the time anyone outside the company noticed, it was already done. To the outside world, the merger was complete, and I was the public face. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Then came the moment. It was a Thursday afternoon when Priya called me into the small conference room. She had that particular smile, the one that meant she'd found something interesting. "You should see this," she said, turning her laptop toward me. It was an email chain between Sarah and a marketing agency she'd hired months earlier, back when she was still running Heart solo. She'd promised them a future equity stake in the business in exchange for promotional exposure. It was never disclosed in our merger paperwork. In legal terms, that's undeclared liability, a breach of contract. She'd lied. Again. "Can we prove it?" I asked. Priya nodded. "Already verified through the agency's records." I even pulled the signed proposal. "Want to guess the date?" I didn't need to. I already knew. It was 2 weeks before she'd asked me for help, meaning she'd been looking for a bailout partner while still trying to leverage the company behind the scenes. "Does this void her equity?" I asked. Priya smiled. "It voids her right to active partnership, and depending on how you want to play it, it can also trigger a buyout clause." I sat back, feeling that cold, calm focus take over. Then we play it. Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Every document, every discrepancy, every late vendor payment tied to her tenure. Priya prepared a formal review report, packaged and ready. Then I scheduled a meeting with Sarah. She showed up 15 minutes late, looking flustered but trying to hide it. I waited until she sat before sliding the folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Documentation," I said, "of the equity breach." Her brow furrowed as she skimmed the first page, then the next. "What are you talking about?" "You entered into an agreement with an outside agency that guaranteed equity consideration," I said evenly. "You didn't disclose it during the merger. That's a violation of Section 2.6 in our partnership agreement." She looked up sharply. "You're twisting this." "No, I'm quoting it." She flipped faster now, the papers rustling. Her face drained of color when she reached the signature page from the agency. "I can explain," she said quickly. "I'm sure you can," I said. "But you don't need to. The paperwork already does." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Here's what's going to happen," I said quietly. "We're executing the buyout clause. You'll receive fair market value for your silent equity stake, minus the debt portion you brought into the merger. Pri has already calculated it. You'll get a wire transfer within 30 days. She stared at me. "You can't do that." "I can. And I am. You're cutting me out of my own company." I tilted my head. "No, Sarah. You cut yourself out when you started treating it like a toy instead of a business." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "You think this is over? You think people won't find out what you did?" I smiled faintly. "They'll find out what you did first, because the new audit filings go public next quarter." Her jaw clenched. For a moment, she looked like she might throw something. Then she just shook her head, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. I sat there for a long moment, the silence humming in my ears. Then I picked up the folder she'd left behind, folded it neatly, and slid it into my drawer. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. Just settled. The next few weeks were a blur of cleanup. Paperwork. Transitions. Adjustments. But with every document signed and every system migrated, the company became more mine. Fully mine. The rebranding went public in February. Redline Creative Group. A family business, reimagined. It was subtle, but deliberate. A quiet statement to the world. And to Sarah, that the story had come full circle. Clients noticed. Congratulated us. Some even joked about the name change. "Glad to see it's in good hands again," one said over a call. I just smiled and said, "We're trying our best." The funny thing is, revenge didn't feel like fire. It felt like calm water, cold, reflective, steady. Sarah had built her empire on mirrors and noise. I rebuilt mine on truth and silence. And when silence wins, it's deafening. But I wasn't done yet. Because one afternoon, Kevin walked into my office holding his phone, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You'll want to see this," he said. He turned the screen toward me. A news article. Heart Creative Solutions officially dissolves amid financial troubles. Sarah hadn't paid her remaining debts. Her brand name, the one she plastered across banners, mugs, and glossy business cards, was officially liquidated by the state. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and said, "Let it rest." Kevin chuckled. "You sure? We could pick up the name for pennies." I smiled faintly. "No, let it die." Then I turned back to my work. But even as I did, I knew something she didn't. I hadn't just taken her company. I had something else. Something she didn't even realize she'd given me. And when the time came, that last piece would be the final nail in the coffin. The perfect ending. The fallout didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a leak behind the walls, quiet at first, then devastating once it hit the surface. After Sarah stormed out of our last meeting, there was a stretch of eerie quiet. No calls, no emails, not even a snide post online, which, for her, was almost unheard of. I kept expecting some sort of retaliation, maybe a smear campaign, a sudden lawsuit, or even one of her passive-aggressive brand statements about betrayal or creative differences. But nothing came, at least not directly. Instead, I started hearing about her unraveling from everyone but her. Chloe overheard from a friend in the startup scene that Sarah had tried pitching a new creative consultancy, something boutique, hyper-stylized, aimed at elevated brand experiences. But every investor she approached wanted to know what happened to her last venture. The whispers about unpaid debts, broken contracts, and the embarrassing collapse of Heart Creative Solutions had made their rounds faster than any of her past marketing campaigns ever had. Turns out, People notice when a brand crashes and burns, especially when it's named after you. Kevin heard from someone in logistics that she'd tried to rehire some of our former drivers under a new LLC, but no one took the bait. Word had gotten around. She had a reputation now, not just for failure, but for using people and tossing them aside. Her old employees talked. Clients talked. Even vendors talked. And when the industry starts talking, it's like trying to run a marathon with bricks tied to your ankles. Sarah was radioactive. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because I had something she never did, loyalty. While she struggled to salvage her image, Redline Creative Group was thriving. We'd signed 3 new long-term contracts by mid-year and expanded into a second location across town. Kevin had streamlined operations so well that we were hitting margins we used to think were impossible. Chloe oversaw a small but brilliant team of junior admins. And I finally had time to do what I'd always wanted: mentor, build, shape something that lasts. We didn't just rebuild a business. We built a culture. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a quarterly review, Kevin pulled me aside. "You know she's trying to sell her condo, right?" he said casually. I blinked. "What?" "She's been meeting with realtors. Dropping the price, too. Probably bleeding money." I didn't say anything. But inside, I could feel the edges of something old and sharp finally dulling. There was no pleasure in her struggle, just closure. Then came the moment I didn't expect. I was walking through a downtown printer expo, something I used to attend with my dad back in the early days, when I saw her. Sarah. She was standing at a table alone, no badge, no booth, just sipping from a branded water bottle and watching the crowd with that same expression she used to wear in high school talent shows. Like she was desperate for someone to notice her, but terrified they actually might. She saw me. For a moment, I thought she might look away. But she didn't. She walked straight over. "Adam." "Sarah." She looked thinner, tired, still dressed like she was trying to be seen. Bright blazer, statement necklace. But the posture was different. Less upright. More resigned. "I heard the new location's doing well," she said, voice flat. "It is." A pause. She looked around. "This used to be your favorite event," she said. I didn't answer. Just waited. She sighed, staring down into her water. "I messed up. That caught me off guard. I thought I could make it work. Thought if I just pushed hard enough, made enough noise. I don't know, that everything would fall into place. But it didn't." "No," I said. "It didn't." She nodded, eyes still down. "They're foreclosing on the condo. I can't cover the payments." I didn't respond. "I know you probably hate me," she said. "I don't," I said honestly. "But I don't trust you either." She looked up at that. And for once, I didn't see anger or pride. Just regret. "Fair." Another pause. Then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "Do you think Dad ever regretted it?" I took a breath. "I think he believed in you," I said. "He just didn't know who you really were. None of us did." She nodded again, then offered a faint, tired smile. "Well, at least now everyone does." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "I'm glad it's you," she said without looking back. "That's running it now?" "I mean that." And then she walked away. I stood there for a while after she disappeared into the crowd. Not because I was shaken, but because I realized something. I didn't need to win against her anymore. I'd already won without her. A few weeks later, I found a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. It was from my dad. It started simply, "Adam, I've been meaning to write this for a long time, but I didn't know how. I made mistakes. A lot of them. Not just with the company, but with you." He went on to explain the pressure he'd felt watching the business age around him. How Sarah's boldness gave him hope for a new chapter, even though deep down he knew she didn't understand it the way I did. "Your mother and I thought we were choosing the future, but we were blind to the present. To you. And that's on us. We're proud of what you've built. Truly. I'm sorry it took losing it all for me to see what was right in front of me." At the bottom was a postscript. "If you ever feel like coming by, the porch light's on." I didn't cry, but I did sit on the couch for a while with the letter in my hands, thinking about all the years I'd given them, how much it hurt to be discarded, and how much more it meant to be seen now. I didn't call him. Not right away. But one night, I drove by the old house. The porch light was on, and that was enough for now. We held our annual client appreciation dinner the following month. It wasn't a flashy event, just good food, handwritten place cards, and a short speech I gave at the end about resilience, loyalty, and second chances. Afterward, as the guests mingled, Kevin clapped me on the back. You did good, boss. Thanks. He nodded toward the windows, where a line of former clients stood laughing over drinks. You ever think about how close you were to just walking away? I smiled. All the time. He raised an eyebrow. Any regrets? I looked around. The team, the energy, the peace. Then I shook my head. No, I said. Not a single one. And in that moment, I realized I'd taken back more than just a company. I'd taken back my story, one they could never rewrite again. My name is Adrian, I'm 22, and last week I graduated college. I wasn't expecting a grand parade or a rented hall with gold balloons spelling my name. I knew better than to dream big in my family, but I did think maybe there'd be something. A dinner, a cake, a card. I'd watched other friends post pictures with their families, all proud smiles and coordinated outfits. Me? I came home to a half-thawed frozen pizza on the counter and a text in the family group chat that said, "Congrats, Adrian," sandwiched between a meme from my uncle and my cousin's dog pics. No one was home. I stared at that pizza for longer than I care to admit. It was still in the plastic. No note, no instructions. Not even in the oven. Just dumped like leftovers from a party no one bothered inviting me to. And the worst part? The smell. The faint scent of charcoal and fireworks still lingered in the cushions. My brother's graduation party had been last weekend. I remember hearing the thumps of bass through my bedroom wall, even though I wasn't invited to that either. I'd been told it was his moment. He's 19, barely scraped through community college, but they went all out. Backyard lights, buffet catering, and I swear to God, a drone hovering around like it was filming the trailer for a Netflix special. I'd watched it from my window, his friends piling in, Mom fussing over cupcakes shaped like tiny diplomas, Dad flipping burgers like it was the 4th of July. I never said anything. I just kept packing up my dorm stuff. Quietly. I didn't want to make it about me. That's what they always said I did. Growing up, anytime I asked for anything, attention, space, help, I was told I was starting drama or being difficult. Even as a kid, I was the one who could entertain himself. My brother, Lucas, always needed the room to revolve around him, and it always did. He had sports trophies, handmade birthday banners, surprise just because gifts. I had space, the kind that echoes. So yeah, when I walked through the door that day and saw that pizza, the kind I used to eat in high school when they forgot to make dinner, I just stared. And when my mom finally came home an hour later, talking on the phone and laughing like it was any other Wednesday, I asked her, "So, no one wanted to do anything for my graduation?" She didn't even look at me at first, just shrugged, tossed her bag on the couch, and said, "You're not really the celebrating type, are you?" Like it was a compliment. Like she was letting me off easy. I didn't reply. I didn't even blink. I just turned, walked to my room, and zipped up the bag I hadn't unpacked yet from moving out of my dorm. I had already taken everything important with me anyway. My laptop, my degree, and the envelope of cash I'd saved from tutoring and part-time shifts. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to get me somewhere else. I walked past her without a word. Past the pizza, still on the counter. Past the congrats text, still pinned at the top of the group chat no one had followed up on. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I just left. Sometimes the loudest moments are the quiet ones. That night, I checked into a small hotel about 30 minutes away. Nothing fancy. Just 4 walls and silence. It was the first time in years I didn't have to brace myself before walking into a room. No tension. No eyes rolling when I opened my mouth, no passive-aggressive digs masked as jokes. Just a bed, a lamp, and me. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. One notification. A text from my Aunt Carla. Why's everyone freaking out? No greeting. No emojis. Just that. I stared at it, wondering what they were saying. Wondering if Mom was telling everyone I'd run off again, the way she used to say it when I took long walks to clear my head and came back to accusations of being dramatic. I thought about replying. Just something short. Maybe. Asked the pizza. But I didn't. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing on my chest like a stack of unfinished conversations. I hadn't cried. Not yet. But I felt the water rising, just under the surface, waiting for the right crack to spill through. The next morning, there were more messages. Some from my cousin. One from Lucas, just a question mark. Then Dad, what's this about leaving? Call your mother. The only one that stuck out came a few minutes later from Mom herself. It said, "We didn't mean to make you feel that way." Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We were wrong." Just that vague, safe phrase. The kind that puts the blame on how I felt instead of what they did. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed a list, just a title, everything they don't know I paid for. I started writing. Tuition. Groceries. Lucas's broken laptop I replaced without telling him. Dad's overdue credit card that mysteriously got cleared. The electric bill when Mom forgot it in January. All the times I kept the lights on, literally and metaphorically, and asked for nothing in return. They didn't know. Because I never made it about me. Because I thought they'd notice eventually. Because I thought family worked like math. You give, you get. But in our house, the equation never balanced. And I was tired of it. The next entry in that list wasn't a payment. It was a plan. One they'd never see coming. The first time I ever considered pulling away financially, it felt like betrayal. Like I was being petty or vengeful. But sitting in that tiny hotel room, replaying that shrug and those 7 words, "You're not really the celebrating type," something inside me finally clicked into place. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about finally letting go of people who never held me. I spent the next day in the hotel lobby, headphones in, noise canceling the world as I went line by line through my online banking. It was almost funny how many recurring charges were tied to them. Netflix, my brother's email. Spotify, my mom's. The phone plan, of course, was still under my name. Group family package that I'd taken over in college because you're better with tech stuff. Water bill, electricity, the cloud storage everyone used to dump their endless photo backups. Mine. I'd never thought twice about it. I just paid. Quietly. Like I always did. That evening, I set a reminder. 3 days from now. Cancel everything. Not out of spite, but because it was time. 2 days passed with silence from me. But my phone, it didn't stop. My mom sent longer and longer messages, each one trying to sound more composed but bleeding through with desperation. At one point, she called me by a nickname she hadn't used since I was a kid. That stung. Not because I missed it, but because I knew she only dusted off affection when she wanted something. Like her love was stored in a cabinet marked emergencies only. Lucas tried calling too. Just once. Left a voicemail. It started with, "Yo, man, not sure what's going on," then paused, and ended with a lazy, "But Mom's trippin'. Can you fix it?" Fix it. Like I was the janitor of their dysfunction. That night, I sent one email. Just one. To my boss at the tutoring center where I'd worked part-time throughout college. She'd once offered me a full-time role if I ever stuck around. I asked if the offer still stood. Her reply came in an hour. "Still yours if you want it. We're opening a new satellite branch. You'd have your own office." I stared at the screen for a long time. My own office. No fireworks. No drone footage. But it felt more real than anything my family had ever handed me. The next morning, I canceled the family phone plan. I got a message almost instantly. "Your device has been disconnected." Then a second. "Unable to authorize payment. Insufficient funds." That one was from the electric company. By noon, I had emails from 3 different customer support agents asking if I was sure I wanted to cancel these shared services. I clicked yes on every one of them. Then, I shut off my phone. Not forever. Just for a day. That evening, I rented a car and drove 2 hours north to check out the new tutoring branch. Small town, decent population, quiet streets. A single coffee shop on the corner with a handwritten chalkboard menu and a barista who actually made eye contact when she spoke. I ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching the sunset through a row of sleepy trees. The whole time, I wondered if they were still trying to call. But I also didn't care. Back at the hotel, my email inbox had exploded. Since the phone plan was down, they'd found my work email, my backup Gmail, even my LinkedIn. There was a message from my dad, short, cold, calculated. "You're being immature. Family has ups and downs. You don't walk away from it." I read that twice. Ups and downs. Funny how they only noticed the downs when I stopped lifting them. At around 10 p.m., I opened the group chat. For the first time in days, I tapped it open just to see what they were saying now. Lucas had sent an all-caps message. "Dude, why is my phone dead? I need it for work." Followed by a string of angry emojis. My mom had replied, "I don't know what's going on with Adrian. He's obviously going through something." Like I was the problem. Like I hadn't been holding everything together for years. Then came the clincher. My aunt, the one who had texted me that first night, wrote, "So, what exactly did we do?" That was it. No apology. No recognition. Just a puzzled shrug in text form. I stared at it for a long while, fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether it was even worth answering, whether explaining myself would make a dent. And then I thought of something my freshman writing professor once said when I struggled with cutting scenes from a story. You don't need to explain everything. Sometimes, silence is the period at the end of a sentence. So I didn't reply, but I did open a new file, a document I labeled Exit Plan, Final. Not because I was running, because I was done staying put. 3 days after I walked out, the silence finally cracked, not on my end, but theirs. It started with an email from the family landlord. Yes, landlord, because despite the show they put on, the house we grew up in wasn't ours. My parents had been renting for years under a long-term agreement with a relative who lived out of state. I had quietly been making up the difference every month. Mom and Dad thought their rent was magically low. No, it was subsidized by me, ever since I found a copy of the overdue notice in our junk drawer 2 years ago. That email now said, payment not received. Contract at risk of default. Please respond immediately. That was the first domino. And when it tipped, everything else followed. Lucas, for all his attitude and ego, still used my Spotify premium. Suddenly, he couldn't play his gym playlists. My dad's credit card, which had been magically improving since I began paying it off bit by bit, got declined. And Mom ran into the biggest wall. She called her stylist and got told her appointment was canceled due to non-payment of the subscription plan they'd signed her up for through my account. The messages that followed turned from confusion to rage. Adrian, what is going on? Why are you doing this? Call me. Now. You think this is funny? You're being cruel. I wasn't laughing. In fact, I was sitting in a small rental apartment, sipping tea on a couch I just bought secondhand, staring at those texts as if they belonged to a version of my life that I'd already walked away from. The tutoring center had offered to help cover moving costs. They even let me pick my own hours. I had real coworkers now. A keycard with my name on it. A plaque on the door that read, A. Bennett, academic consultant. No one here shrugged when I spoke. No one forgot I existed. And yet, I could still feel their grip tugging. That guilt, that invisible leash that years of being the responsible one had knotted around my throat. It wasn't enough to leave. They needed me to feel bad for leaving. That's what the next wave of messages was about. My mom switched tones like she was flipping through radio stations. I know you're upset, but this is hurting everyone. I didn't mean what I said. I was just stressed. You always take things so personally. You're punishing us for being imperfect. Then finally, you'll regret this when we're gone. There it was. The emotional grenade. She didn't know how to say sorry, so she reached for fear instead. But I didn't bite. Instead, I replied to Aunt Carla, the only one who'd asked why, even if she didn't really want the answer. I kept it short. I graduated. I came home to a frozen pizza. I watched you all throw Lucas a full-blown party while pretending I didn't exist. And now, the only time anyone remembers me is when they lose something I used to quietly provide. I didn't disappear. I just stopped volunteering for invisibility. She never replied. A week passed. And then, the doorbell rang. It was a Saturday. I was halfway through reading a book I'd been meaning to start since sophomore year. I opened the door, and there she was, Mom. Her hair a mess. No makeup. That face, the one she wore when the teacher called home or the check bounced. That face that meant damage control. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me like she didn't know where to begin. I didn't offer help. Finally, she said, we just wanted to celebrate you the way you'd want. I tilted my head. With silence? And a freezer meal? Her eyes watered. And for a second, I thought maybe this would be the moment she got it. That she'd say sorry. That she'd finally, truly see me. Instead, she said, you've always been so sensitive. That was it. Not an apology. Just another deflection, dressed in faux concern. I stepped back and started to close the door. She put her hand on the frame. Wait, please. At least talk to your brother. He's been a wreck. His job depends on his phone. I gave a dry laugh. You mean the one I paid for? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. That was when I decided I was done playing the role of the family's silent ATM. I stepped fully outside. Calm. Clear. You don't get to neglect me, minimize me, and then panic when the support you took for granted vanishes. I was never celebrated, not once, not even when I paid for things you didn't know were mine to give. I walked out because the only thing colder than that pizza on the counter was the way this family pretended I mattered. She blinked. Her face paled. And I knew in that moment that this conversation wasn't going to fix anything. Because she still didn't get it. So I gave her one final look. I'm not the one who disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't welcome. Then I closed the door. And behind it, for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. It took exactly 3 days for the fallout to turn into full-blown chaos. After Mom showed up at my apartment and left empty-handed, I heard nothing. Not a text, not an email, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook post. Just silence. But silence, I learned, is rarely peaceful in families like mine. It's a pause, a lull in the storm before the next wave hits. And it did. I got a call from my former landlord at the tutoring center. He sounded amused. "Hey, Adrian. Not trying to pry, but there's someone calling around saying they're trying to track you down." A woman. Emotional. Left a message saying it was urgent, but didn't say what it was about. "Thought you should know." I thanked him, already knowing who it was. That same day, I opened my laptop and checked the shared family Google Drive. It was still linked to my email, one of the last things I hadn't touched. Inside, buried in a folder named Home Stuff, I found copies of unpaid utility bills, rent notices, and something new, a scanned letter from a collection agency. My name wasn't on it, but I'd seen enough of these before to know where it was headed. I logged out. Later that night, Lucas tried to call me using someone else's number. When I answered, there was a pause. "Dude," he said, "you really cut everyone off, huh?" I didn't reply. "They're freaking out. Mom's crying every day. Dad's barely talking to anyone. Aunt Carla's been trying to talk sense into them, but look, can you just come home and talk to them?" There was a time I might have folded. I might have heard the word crying and mistaken it for remorse. But I'd sat with this too long. I knew better now. "You mean the same mom who couldn't even heat up a pizza on the day I graduated? She didn't mean it like that." "No, Lucas," I said, calm and clear, "she meant it exactly like that. Just like she meant it when she told me I was too sensitive, when Dad said I should just be grateful I'm not homeless, or when they spent $1,000 celebrating you and left me a microwave box and a frozen dinner. They meant all of it." "You're being harsh." "No," I replied, "I'm being honest." He sighed, like I was the one exhausting him. "You think you're the only one who's had it hard," he snapped. "You think you're the only one who's done anything for this family?" "No," I said, "but I'm the only one who did it quietly, who paid the bills no one wanted to talk about, who showed up, over and over, and got treated like a backup plan." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Why do you think I stayed quiet so long, Lucas? Because I didn't want to hurt anyone? No. It's because I knew the second I stopped giving, someone would call me selfish. And look, here we are." He didn't respond. I hung up. The next morning, I got a letter in the mail. A real one, handwritten. The envelope had my mom's loopy handwriting. Inside was a 2-page letter, half apology, half justification. She wrote about how hard things had been raising 2 boys, how they didn't mean to overlook me, how Lucas had always been more expressive, and I was independent. She kept using that word like it was an excuse. Independent, as if being low maintenance meant disposable. She said they were scared, that everything was falling apart without me, that I'd always been the one to keep things running smoothly. She ended the letter with, "We need you. Please come back so we can fix this." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not to frame, not to save, just to remember. Because here's what they still didn't understand. You can't fix something that's been broken by design. My absence didn't break the family. It just exposed the cracks they'd been plastering over with denial. I moved forward. The new tutoring branch took off faster than anyone expected. I ended up managing a small team of junior tutors, all of whom reminded me of students I used to be bright, quiet, too used to being ignored. I gave them room to speak, encouraged them, celebrated small wins. One of them, a soft-spoken kid named Ezra, told me I was the first adult who ever remembered their name without asking twice. That stuck with me more than any family compliment ever had. I started building a life that didn't orbit around people who needed me to shrink in order to shine. I met neighbors, made friends, bought myself a bike. I found a new routine, one I didn't have to apologize for. Eventually, I blocked my family's numbers, not out of anger, but peace. I needed to stop letting them rent space in my mind without paying. Months passed. Then, on the morning of my 23rd birthday, I woke up to a knock at the door. It was a delivery driver. He handed me a small box, no return address. I opened it and found a folded card and a framed photo of Lucas and me from when we were kids. We were sitting on the curb in front of our old house, eating popsicles and grinning like idiots. The card simply said, "I didn't know what you were carrying." I do now. I'm sorry. L. I stared at that picture for a long time. Not because it made me nostalgic, but because it reminded me how long I've been waiting to be seen. And maybe now, someone finally did. I didn't call back. I didn't send a reply. But I didn't throw it away, either. Some things don't need closure. They just need distance. I celebrated that birthday with 2 coworkers, a homemade cake, and a drink someone smuggled into the office after hours. We laughed. We talked about music and books and bad Tinder dates. No one asked me to prove my worth. No one made a passive-aggressive joke when I talked too much. No one compared me to anyone else. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest at my own table. I felt home. Not the one I came from, the one I built. And I didn't need fireworks. Just the quiet kind of peace that doesn't ask for anything in return. You ever have one of those family reunions where you can feel the setup coming? Like, you're not just invited out of love or to reconnect. No, you're being summoned for a performance, a spotlight. Except the only role they've cast you in is the background character who claps at someone else's success. That was me, Josh. I'm 29, and this story starts with a text from my mom that just said, "Please come this time. Everyone wants to see you." Right. I hadn't gone to a family gathering in 3 years. Not because I'm bitter or dramatic. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly because they never felt like family. Every single event felt like a comparison game. Who bought a house? Who got engaged? Who had a kid? Who got a new job? And every time, someone, usually my Aunt Diane, would toss in a comment about how I was still finding myself, like I was a lost sock or something. I kept my distance after a while. Built my own thing. Quietly. No Facebook posts, no updates, no drama. But this time, something in my mom's voice and in my curiosity made me say yes. I'd been building my company for the past 4 years. It started as a niche recruiting platform for engineers. Then we pivoted into building tools for enterprise hiring. 6 months ago, we got acquired. Clean exit. The kind that changes everything. But I kept that quiet. My name wasn't on the headlines, and I liked it that way. I wasn't flashy. I liked being underestimated. The reunion was set for Saturday. Same place as always. My uncle's obnoxiously large house with the circular driveway, 3 SUVs out front, and that weird iron eagle above the garage like he was running some kind of secret society. I pulled up in my Tesla. Not that anyone noticed or cared. They were too busy swarming Ryan. Let me tell you about cousin Ryan. He's 26. Blonde, big smile, varsity jacket energy. He's the golden boy. Straight A's in high school, business degree, summer internships at big firms. Your classic LinkedIn warrior. The family loved him. And apparently, today was his coronation. The second I walked in, Aunt Diane grabbed me by the wrist. Like, physically grabbed me, and went, "Josh. Oh my God, you're here. Come say hi to Ryan. He just got hired at Nexera." Nexera. I knew the name. A fintech startup that got a round of funding recently. Some flashy headlines, a big valuation, and, unbeknownst to Aunt Diane, one of the companies my firm now technically owned. Not directly, but under our new parent company's umbrella. I blinked. "Oh wow," I said, smiling. "That's exciting." She leaned in and whispered like we were sharing gossip, except her voice carried enough to be heard by the next zip code. "He's going to be a millionaire before he's 30. He's just so brilliant." Then came the kicker. "Unlike some people," she added, letting that last part dangle like a cheap insult she thought I wouldn't catch. I smiled again. Not because I wasn't annoyed, but because this was the exact reason I came. Ryan was at the center of the backyard, surrounded by lawn chairs, lemonade, and admiration. He was talking about stock options like he discovered them himself. A small crowd of cousins and uncles nodded like disciples. "It's pre-IPO, so yeah, there's risk, but I'm not worried. We're scaling fast." The CEO knows me by name. I stood at the edge of the group, hands in my pockets, just observing. That's when Grandma asked the inevitable. "So Josh, honey, what are you up to these days?" The volume dipped. Not fully silent, but enough for me to feel a dozen heads tilt toward me like sunflowers chasing light. I considered giving my usual vague answer. "Oh, you know, work's been good. Busy. But today felt different." I wasn't here to brag. I was here to remind them that I exist outside their expectations. "Not much," I said, sipping my drink. "I just signed Ryan's paycheck last week." Silence. Like, actual silence. I've never heard that many mouths close at once. Even Ryan blinked like he didn't understand what he'd heard. Aunt Diane's smile twitched. And that's when Grandpa, who's 82, hard of hearing, and usually half asleep, stood up from his lawn chair, leaned on his cane, and said, "Wait a damn minute." But before we get to what he said, let me rewind a little, because this moment wasn't just a witty comeback. It was 4 years in the making. And it started with a college dropout, a crappy apartment above a laundromat, and a family who thought I was wasting my life. See, when I left college at 21, everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My dad stopped talking to me for a month. My mom cried. Aunt Diane told everyone I'd probably end up delivering food or starting a band. I didn't care. I had an idea, and I wanted to build something. Not for clout, not for applause, just for me. But that decision cost me more than just their approval. And as I stood in that backyard, watching their smug smiles fade into confusion, I remembered everything they said along the way. I remembered the birthday I wasn't invited to because they assumed I'd be too busy with my startup thing. I remembered the Thanksgiving where Ryan joked that I was technically unemployed, and everyone laughed, even my parents. I remembered every ignored text, every eye roll, every forced smile when I tried to explain what I was building and got nothing but blank stares. So no, my answer wasn't about flexing. It was about reclaiming space. And as Grandpa adjusted his hearing aid and looked around at the stunned crowd, I realized the best part hadn't even happened yet. Because they hadn't heard the full story. Not even close. Grandpa's voice cut through the silence like a rusty saw. "Wait a damn minute. You signed his paycheck." He squinted over at me, then at Ryan. "What does that even mean?" All eyes turned to me again, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest like a sandbag. My hand tightened around my drink. I hadn't meant to say it out loud like that. It just slipped. But now that it was hanging in the air, there was no taking it back. Ryan gave a short, awkward laugh. "Haha, right, Josh. That's a good one." He looked around, hoping someone would join in. No one did. I smiled gently. Yeah, small world, right? But I didn't offer more. Not yet. Let them stew. Aunt Diane recovered first. She stood up straighter, tugged down her cardigan, and gave me that tight, dismissive smile she always used when she was trying to reassert control. "Well, I'm sure that's a fun joke, Josh. But Ryan worked really hard to get where he is. He beat out over 100 candidates for his position." "I know," I replied. I remember seeing the list. Another silence. Grandpa sat back down slowly, mumbling something about needing stronger coffee. Cousin Emily raised an eyebrow. Uncle Frank just looked confused. And Ryan looked scared. I could have ended it there. Said nothing more, let the curiosity simmer and walk away. But part of me, some deep, wounded part, wanted more than that. Not revenge, exactly. Just balance. And balance was long overdue. When I was 22, I moved back in with my parents after burning through my savings. I was working 16-hour days trying to code the first prototype of my platform, barely sleeping, and delivering groceries at night just to cover my student loans. At one point, I remember eating plain rice for dinner for 6 days straight. You think I exaggerate, but no. I have photos. I used to joke with my one friend back then that if I ever made it, I'd buy myself a gold-plated rice cooker. But the worst part wasn't the struggle. It was the pity. Every dinner with my family felt like an intervention. My mom would say things like, "Maybe you should just apply for something stable for now. You can always do your little business later." My dad would stare at the TV and grunt. My sister, Claire, who was in med school at the time, would chime in with stories about her residency and how she had no time for distractions like that. The unspoken message was always the same. Josh is wasting his potential. Josh needs to grow up. The day of Claire's graduation party, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mom whispered, "I just hope he doesn't embarrass us in front of everyone." I didn't even cry that time. I just left before the speeches started. I stopped showing up after that. I built in silence, learned in silence, grew in silence. Back in the backyard, the buzz had shifted. Ryan was still talking, trying to salvage the attention. Something about his manager inviting him to a private Slack channel. But people weren't listening as closely. The sparkle was gone. Now they were looking at me. For the first time in years, they wanted to hear me. But before I could say anything else, Aunt Diane struck again. "You know what I think, Josh?" she said, folding her arms. "I think you're jealous. You came here to cause a scene. You've always hated when someone else gets the spotlight." That stung. Not because it was true, but because she said it so easily, so publicly, like I'd been some bitter parasite my whole life. No, I said calmly. I came here because Mom asked me to, and because I was hoping, naively, I guess, that maybe this year would be different. Then she laughed. Different how? We're just proud of Ryan. He earned it. You don't get to come in here after disappearing for years and act like you're above everyone. I'm not above anyone, I said. But I'm not beneath you either. That's when the gloves came off. Really? Because last I checked, you dropped out of college, lived off your parents, and couldn't even hold a real job. Ryan has a career. He's going places. And you? What have you even done that's worth clapping for? I could feel the back of my neck heating up. I looked at my mom. She was biting her lip, eyes darting between us. My dad just stared down at his plate. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Claire walked over. She must have caught the last few lines. Her face was unreadable. You know, she said quietly, it wouldn't kill you to be happy for someone else's success. And that was it. Not the words. The weight behind them. The realization that even after all these years, even after everything I'd built, they still saw me as the family disappointment. Not a self-made entrepreneur. Not the guy who turned a broke idea into a multi-million-dollar exit. Not the man who stayed up late learning how to pitch, how to hire, how to survive. Just the dropout. The pity case. The failure. I left. Didn't storm out. Didn't make a scene. Just walked back to my car and drove away. I didn't go home. I parked by the old high school field where I used to eat lunch alone after quitting soccer. I stared at the empty bleachers and thought about every moment that had led me here. Every comment. Every slight. Every backhanded compliment. I called my old mentor. He picked up on the second ring. Josh, he said. Everything okay? I paused. I think I want to do something petty. He laughed. Define petty. I want to invite my entire family to dinner next weekend. And I want to book it at the most expensive restaurant in the city. And I want to pay for everything. But only after they sit through a presentation. He didn't hesitate. Do it. So I did. I waited a few days. Let the tension simmer. Then I messaged my mom, asking her to help me invite everyone to a dinner to celebrate something important. She didn't ask too many questions. Just said she was glad I was trying to reconnect. I booked out the private room at the most luxurious restaurant in the city. The kind with gold menus, valet parking, and a sommelier that makes you feel like wine is a religion. I pre-ordered everything. Steak, seafood, dessert, top-shelf drinks. Told them to spare no expense. Everyone RSVP'd yes. Of course they did. They thought it was about them. The night of the dinner, I wore a black suit and brought printed copies of something I'd been working on for a few days. It wasn't a presentation. It wasn't even flashy. It was a single page. A diagram. A breakdown of our company's organizational structure, before and after the acquisition. And there, in black and white, was Nexera, listed under our parent brand. With my name at the top, just beneath the CEO. I got to the restaurant early. Greeted each family member as they arrived. Smiled. Took photos. Listened to Aunt Diane talk about how Ryan had been handpicked for a new client project. Then, once everyone had their appetizers, I stood. I just want to say a few words, I began. But before I could, Ryan, poor, sweet Ryan, stood up and said, before you go, I just wanted to thank everyone for their support. This new job is a big deal for me, and I hope to make you all proud. Polite applause. I nodded. Thanks, Ryan. That's actually a great segue. I handed out the sheets. Watched them read. Watched their eyes widen. Watched Aunt Diane's mouth go slack. And then, I said the line I'd rehearsed in the mirror. You were right. Ryan is going places. And lucky for him, one of those places is under my supervision. Gasps. Forks dropped. And just as the silence threatened to swallow the room whole, Grandpa stood up. He didn't say a word at first. Just looked at me. Then looked at the page. Then at Ryan. Grandpa's hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down. His eyes stayed on me. Blue-gray, weathered with age, but still sharp in moments that mattered. The room was silent, almost reverent, like we'd all stepped into a church and nobody told the priest he could speak. He turned to Ryan, who had frozen with his champagne glass half lifted, and said slowly, "You work for him?" Ryan's throat bobbed. His eyes darted between me, his mom, the paper. No, I mean, not directly. He's not in my department. He doesn't, oversee me or anything. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The paper spoke for itself. My name was there. VP of Talent Infrastructure and Strategic Acquisitions. under the new holding company's logo, just beneath the executive board. Nexera was one of 5 acquisitions under our branch. I had signed Ryan's paycheck. He was technically 3 levels below me, 2 if you counted dotted line structure. I didn't flaunt it. I'd never even interacted with him on Slack. But the numbers didn't lie. I could have flagged his performance review if I wanted to, approved or declined his bonus. I could have assigned his team to some obscure internal project just for fun, and every person in that room now knew it. Grandpa chuckled, then turned to Aunt Diane. Well, would you look at that? You were so busy puffing up the boy, you didn't see the man standing next to him. He looked back at me. I always knew you had fired Josh. The old man gave me a nod I hadn't seen since I was a kid trying to build model trains in his garage. Then he sat down and stabbed his steak with renewed enthusiasm. But the room hadn't caught up. Not yet. Claire was silent, looking down at the paper like it had betrayed her. My dad shifted uncomfortably, glancing at my mom like he needed permission to speak. Aunt Diane had gone completely pale, blinking like someone pulled the floor out from under her. And Ryan. Oh, Ryan. Looked like he wanted to disappear. But I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even angry anymore. That part had come and gone. What I felt, more than anything, was tired. And as I sat back down and took a slow sip of water, I realized this wasn't the ending. This was the middle. Let me take you back for a moment. Back to the part of the story I skipped over in the beginning. The part most people don't talk about when they make it. The part that hurts. After I left Claire's graduation party early, I moved out of my parents' house and into a place I could barely afford, above a laundromat, with a leaky ceiling and paper-thin walls. I worked nights delivering food and days building my startup, cobbling together code and clunky prototypes with tutorials and late-night forums. I had one friend, Jason, who believed in the idea, so he helped on weekends for free. The first version of the platform crashed constantly. The second was barely usable. The third started to work. We got our first paying user 14 months in. A small firm in Ohio. $99 a month. I cried when the Stripe notification hit. Not out of joy, but out of relief. I wasn't crazy. The night we hit $500 MRR, I bought 2 paper crowns from Burger King and made Jason wear one. We toasted with soda and talked like kings. But growth was slow. Money was tighter than ever. Every dollar that came in went to hosting fees, UX improvements, customer support. I didn't pay myself for 26 months. My parents didn't know that. They assumed I was freeloading. My dad once asked if I'd ever contribute to society. I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't go to family gatherings. Didn't answer texts. I lived in that in-between place. Too broke to feel successful, too stubborn to quit. And then came my lowest point. Year 3. We lost our biggest client due to a feature bug. Our churn spiked. Jason's mom got sick, and he had to step away. I was alone again. I maxed out my last credit card to keep the lights on. I applied for night shifts at a warehouse just to scrape by. That night, I sat in my car outside the warehouse orientation center, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and asked myself, why? Why keep going? Why suffer? Why not just get a normal job and stop this madness? But something in me, something small, quiet, and angry, refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of returning to those family dinners with nothing to show. Maybe it was the memory of Claire rolling her eyes when I told her about my idea. Whatever it was, it made me turn the key, drive back home, and fix the damn bug that night. 2 weeks later, we landed a call with an angel investor. And everything changed. His name was Mark. He wasn't flashy, just a practical guy who liked our idea and saw potential. He gave us $50,000 in seed money. Enough to breathe. Enough to hire one dev part-time. From there, we grew. Slowly, then faster. We signed new clients. Word got around. 2 years later, a VC firm made an offer. We countered, negotiated, signed. I moved into a real apartment. Jason came back. We brought on a team. A real team. Then came the acquisition. $12.8 million. Clean terms. No drama. I walked away with a healthy slice. Not enough to retire forever, but enough to never answer to anyone again. I stayed on for a new role, strategic acquisitions, and internal infrastructure. The part of the job where you get to help companies like ours grow smarter, faster, better. One of the first companies I helped acquire? Nexera. I didn't even know Ryan worked there until I saw his name on a personnel list months later. I laughed when I saw it, but I didn't say a word. Until the reunion. Back at the restaurant, I watched my family pick at their food, too proud to speak and too shaken to pretend nothing had happened. I gave a short toast. Thanked them for coming. Thanked my parents for raising me. Thanked Jason quietly. Then I paid the bill, every cent, and walked out. Not with my chest puffed out. Not with swagger. Just peace. But peace doesn't erase the past. The next week, my mom texted me. Can we talk? I called her. She didn't apologize right away. Just asked questions. Real ones. About the company. About my life. I told her about the nights in the laundromat. The rice. The tears. The quiet. She didn't say much. Just listened. I think that hurt her more than anything else I could have said. That she hadn't known. That I hadn't told her. That we'd lived under the same roof, and she had no idea I was drowning. She cried. I almost did. Claire sent me an email. Long, formal. Apologetic. Said she admired me, even if she hadn't shown it. Said she was proud. I didn't reply right away. Not because I was angry. Just because I wasn't sure I believed her yet. Ryan? He hasn't reached out. But I heard through the grapevine, he's keeping his head down at work now. Word travels. And it turns out, people are a little more careful when they realize the guy they once joked about now sits 3 rungs above them. As for Aunt Diane, she's been quiet on Facebook lately. No more brag posts. No more humble brags about Ryan. Just photos of her garden and passive-aggressive quotes about real success being quiet. I smile every time I see one. But here's the truth. Revenge felt good in the moment. But peace felt better. Not because they finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need the validation. I'd spent so many years trying to prove I wasn't a failure that I forgot I already wasn't one. And maybe the real win wasn't that they knew now. It's that I didn't need them to. But still, this story isn't over. Because something else happened after that dinner. Something I didn't expect. Something that would flip the entire family dynamic again. And this time, not in my favor. It started with a voicemail. 3 weeks after the dinner, I was on a flight back from Chicago, bleary-eyed and running on 2 hours of sleep, when I landed and saw the notification. Missed call, Dad. Message, 1 minute, 23 seconds. We didn't talk often. Even after everything, our relationship hovered in this weird limbo where we were polite but distant, like 2 co-workers who used to be close but hadn't found their rhythm again. I played the message as I waited at the baggage carousel. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. Hey, Josh. Listen. Something's come up. Nothing urgent, don't worry. But your grandfather's been asking about you. Wants to see you. I think it's important. He's not saying much, but when he asks twice, I listen. Call me. That was all. My stomach tightened a little. Grandpa had always been sharp, but his health wasn't what it used to be. He still lived on his own, refused to move out of the house he'd built with his own 2 hands. But lately, my mom had been hinting he was slowing down. I called back the next morning. Josh, he boomed when he answered. You finally done playing with airplanes and meetings and all that jazz? I chuckled. Just landed. What's up? There was a long pause. Then, come over. Tomorrow if you can. There's something I want to show you. His house hadn't changed. The same peeling blue paint on the porch rails. The same wind chimes that clinked in the soft breeze. The same smell of coffee and cedar and something faintly medicinal that clung to old walls and older memories. He was waiting for me on the porch, wearing his usual suspenders and that flat cap that made him look like he'd walked off the set of a 1950s baseball game. You're late, he said, even though I was 5 minutes early. Nice to see you too, I replied. He waved me in without another word. Inside, he led me to his study, a cluttered room filled with tools, old maps, stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings, and a locked cabinet that hadn't been opened in decades. He sat down slowly in his worn leather chair and gestured to the opposite seat. Then he unlocked the cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it to me. Inside were a dozen old documents, property deeds, tax forms, letters, even a wrinkled photo of a lake house I barely remembered from childhood. My eyes skimmed the top page, confused. I don't understand, I said. What is this? That, Grandpa said slowly, is everything the family doesn't know about. I looked up. He leaned back, resting both hands on his cane. That lake house. It's been in the family since the 70s. Your grandmother and I bought it before any of your uncles got married. Never told anyone it was under my name only. Figured it'd be less of a fight when I passed. I kept reading. Property titles, dated signatures. My name on a few of them, dated within the past year. You transferred these to me? He nodded. Started the paperwork months ago. Made it official last week. I blinked. Why me? Another pause. He stared at me with a strange intensity, like he was trying to see through my skin and into my bones. Because you showed me something they didn't. Grit. Fire. You earned everything you've got. They, your father, Diane, Claire, the rest, they all think success is owed to them because they check the right boxes. Good grades. Good schools. The right job titles. He leaned forward. But you? You built. And then you showed grace. You didn't rub it in their faces, even when you had the right to. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He continued, quieter now. They think I'm leaving it all to your dad. Diane thinks Ryan's getting a share. But the truth is, I've watched how they treat people when they think they're above them. And I've watched how you stayed humble when you didn't have to. He tapped the folder. You're the executor now. You hold the key. And when the time comes, it's your call what happens next. My pulse picked up. Does anyone else know? He smiled. Nope. That's the fun part. I left his house feeling like someone had handed me a loaded weapon and told me to use it wisely. I didn't ask for this. Didn't even want it at first. But the more I thought about it, about the lake house, the accounts, the forgotten shares in an old family business that still produced a small but steady income, the more I realized what I'd been given. Leverage. And suddenly, memories started to resurface. Like Claire laughing in my face when I asked if she could look over a contract back in the early days of the company. I'm a doctor, not a magician, she'd said. Or Diane telling my mom behind my back that I was a hopeless case, and that they should start planning for when he comes crawling back. Or Ryan bragging at a wedding that some people think startups are a ticket to easy money but don't understand the real world. I remembered it all. And now? Now I held the strings. Over the next few weeks, I began to plan. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because I wanted clarity, and a little justice, and maybe, just maybe a spectacle. First, I called my lawyer. Had him review every document Grandpa gave me, confirmed the transfers, filed the quiet paperwork to complete a few lingering deeds, set up protections, watched as the legal authority shifted in my name, bit by bit. Then I checked the old business registry for a company called Pinegrove Utility LLC. The family forgot about it after it was sold off in the late 2000s. But someone had kept a minority stake. That someone was Grandpa. And that 7% stake? Now mine. And that 7% had a new buyer knocking at the door. $280,000. I signed the papers. Suddenly, I had liquid cash and legal control over 3 parcels of land, 1 cabin, and a family trust account Diane didn't even know existed. The irony? The entire family thought Grandpa was getting forgetful, that he needed help managing his affairs. They were already circling like vultures, assuming that when he passed, they'd divvy up the leftovers. They had no idea the will had already changed. They had no idea I was the executor. They had no idea I now held the passwords to every account he ever touched. I waited until Thanksgiving. This time, the dinner was at Diane's house. It was the usual circus, roast turkey, polite insults, performative laughter. Ryan was quieter than usual, kept his head down. I caught him glancing at me now and then, like he still wasn't sure if he was allowed to be mad or impressed. Claire had brought her new boyfriend, a surgeon. She introduced him 3 times, as if we hadn't heard her the first 2. And Diane? Diane was in full hostess mode. This turkey is from that specialty farm near the vineyard. Nothing frozen here, she bragged. And we only use ceramic knives now. Better for the environment. I smiled. Said nothing. Let her talk. Let them all talk. Then, as dessert was served, I clinked my glass. Hey everyone, I said, standing. Can I have just 5 minutes? They all turned. Even Grandpa looked up from his pumpkin pie. I pulled out a small, black folder. Laid it gently on the table. This, I said, is the updated deed to the lake house. Diane blinked. The lake house. It's in my name now, I said calmly. Grandpa transferred it last month, along with a few other assets. You could hear the blood drain from faces. Claire frowned. What are you talking about? I opened the folder to the notarized document, turned it around for everyone to see. Aunt Diane went stiff. That has to be a mistake. That property belongs to the family. To us. Grandpa cleared his throat. I am the family, he said, and I made my choice. I let that hang for a second before continuing. I'm not doing anything with it right now, but I will be restructuring a few things. Which means if anyone had plans to use the house next summer without permission, they might want to rethink that. Claire's boyfriend started to excuse himself. Ryan looked like he'd swallowed a spoon. Diane stood abruptly. This is insane. This is manipulation. You convinced an old man to sign over our family's property. No, Grandpa said firmly. I gave it to someone who earned it. But I also made him executor, Grandpa added. When I pass, Josh's final say. Over everything. The silence that followed was not like the dinner silence from before. This one was heavy, ugly, final. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about land or money. This was about truth. And it was time to show them what truth looked like when it walked in the room with a folder and a plan. And that's when I dropped the final envelope on the table. Diane's name printed on the front. Inside, something she'd never seen coming. Something she should have remembered. A mistake she made years ago. And I had the receipts. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because when she opened that envelope, and her face changed, that's when everything truly started to unravel. Diane's fingers trembled as she slid the paper out of the envelope. She unfolded it with the caution of someone who already knew they were holding something dangerous. Her eyes scanned the page, moving faster as her breath caught. By the time she hit the signature at the bottom, her face had gone completely still, expressionless, but pale in a way that gave everything away. I didn't say a word. I wanted her to speak first. Where did you get this? She finally whispered, clutching the paper a little too tightly. It was in one of Grandpa's old files, I said calmly, with the rest of the trust documents. You went through his private things? She snapped, her voice rising an octave, desperate now. You manipulated him. You must have. He would never give you this. You've always hated me. Stop, Grandpa said, voice low but firm. He didn't manipulate anything. I gave it to him. The room went silent again, but this time it was vibrating under the surface, like the air was waiting to crack. Claire leaned over to peek at the document in Diane's hands. What is it? I turned to Claire, slowly, almost theatrically. A promissory note, I said. Signed by Aunt Diane 23 years ago. For a $37,000 loan that Grandpa gave her and Uncle Ron when they wanted to start that landscaping business. The one that failed after a year. Diane's eyes went wide. He said it was a gift. We were family, and it was. He said not to worry about it. Grandpa shook his head. I said, don't worry about paying it yet. I never forgave that debt. I just waited. Waited to see if you'd bring it up. You never did. She was stammering now, rage and fear colliding behind her eyes. That was 20 years ago. It's irrelevant now. And anyway, any lawyer would say the statute of limitations. It's not about suing you, I said, folding my hands neatly in my lap. It's about family. About fairness. You've spent decades treating everyone like they were beneath you. Bragging about your money. Making jabs about people's careers, their choices. My mom, my dad, me. And the whole time, you never once thought about the help you got to get started. Claire spoke up, cautious now. Okay, but that was a long time ago, Josh. Why bring this up now? Because, I said, turning to face the entire room. This family has spent years rewarding arrogance and punishing humility. I watched all of you treat me like I was broken just because I didn't follow the same path you did. You mocked me for building something from scratch. You belittled me when I was at my lowest. You ignored me unless you needed something to gossip about. And now, I paused. Let the tension rise. Now, I'm the one holding the keys. To the property. To the accounts. To this family's legacy. Diane stood up. You're just doing this for revenge. You always were jealous of Ryan, of Claire. I tilted my head. You keep saying that word. Jealous. But let's be honest. What exactly is it you think I'm jealous of? No one answered. So I kept going. Claire's success? She earned that. I respect her. Even if she's cold sometimes, at least she works for what she has. Claire stiffened, but didn't interrupt. Ryan? I was never jealous of him. But you made sure the entire family believed I should be. Every dinner, every party. You made him the star and made me the cautionary tale. You created a narrative and fed it until it became gospel. Well, guess what? The story changed. Grandpa chuckled softly. I turned back to Diane. You owe $37,000. I don't need the money, but I do want a statement. A signed letter acknowledging the loan, the terms, and that you misrepresented it as a gift to avoid repayment. She scoffed. You're joking. I pulled out another sheet from the folder. I've drafted it for you. You can't make me sign that. No, I said. But if you don't, I'll file it with Grandpa's full estate records. And then you'll be in violation of a promissory agreement under the terms of the updated trust, which gives me the right to legally bar you from inheritance distribution for failure to acknowledge debts to the trust originator. Diane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ryan looked like he was watching a live car crash and wasn't sure which side of the windshield he was on. Claire sat perfectly still, eyes locked on me, no longer angry, just curious. For once, really listening. I turned to the group. And just so everyone's clear, this isn't about punishing her. It's about accountability. I was called a failure for years. I was left out of birthdays, mocked at reunions, judged for not being on the same timeline as everyone else. Now that I'm successful, you want me to pretend none of that happened? I shook my head. I won't. I'm not looking for applause, but I am looking for honesty. So here's how it's going to go. I looked each of them in the eye. 1. If you want access to the lake house, you come through me. 2. I will be revising the family trust rules. That includes limiting access to discretionary funds and implementing contribution-based equity for future use of any shared properties. 3. No more backroom deals. No more he said, she said. I'll be setting up quarterly reports for any shared assets. Full transparency. I looked at Claire. You're a doctor. You understand systems. If you want to help me manage this as co-executor, I'd welcome it. But not as a favor to me. As an act of atonement. She nodded slowly. I'd be okay with that. 4. Ryan. He looked up, startled like I'd called on him in class. You don't owe me anything. But we're in the same company now. If you ever want to talk about your role, or your growth, or how to actually succeed in the startup world, my door's open. But I'm not protecting you. If you slack off, you'll be fired like anyone else. Earn your place. He nodded once. Hesitant, but grateful. And 5, I said, turning back to Diane. You have until the end of the weekend to sign that letter, or your name is off the list. She stared at me, then slowly sat down. She didn't say another word for the rest of the night. The fallout wasn't immediate. It trickled in over the weeks that followed. First came the apology texts. From Claire. From my mom. Even from cousins who hadn't said 2 words to me in years. Everyone was suddenly reflective, suddenly interested in my journey, in learning more about what you went through. I responded when I could. Politely, but not always warmly. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. Ryan started showing up to work earlier. I noticed his Slack activity. I noticed him asking smarter questions. He was trying, in his own way, to change. And I respected that. A month later, Claire invited me to a hospital fundraiser she was speaking at. I went. She introduced me as my brilliant brother who built something from scratch when none of us believed in him. It wasn't performative. It was real. That night we talked. Not about the past. About the future. We weren't best friends again. But we were finally walking the same direction. Diane. She signed the letter. Eventually. But she hasn't spoken to me since. I'm okay with that. She doesn't control the narrative anymore. As for me, I still run my division at the company. Still invest in small startups. Still live in the same apartment. Still drive the same Tesla. But I visit the lake house now. Fixed it up. I spend weekends there sometimes, alone or with people I actually care about. I built a fire pit out back. Put in a new dock. Planted trees. Peaceful. Quiet. No tension. No comparisons. No noise. Just me, the water, and the crackle of the fire. It's not about money. It never was. It's about knowing who you are when no one's clapping for you, and knowing who they are when the clapping stops. That's the real inheritance.